Chapter 463. In his own country, in his own capital, in his own power center, he was asked to give up his seat by a foreign marshal. This could be said to be the most humiliating moment in the history of Wulan state. It was also the most humiliating moment in President Carlos's life. There was a flash of anger in his eyes and he looked up at Li Tianlan's eyes. This was the office of the president. He was sitting here in the high-level conference room. He was the core of the entire Wulan state. Li Tianlan said that this was not his seat. This was his seat. That was what Carlos thought. So in the conference room that was still echoing with the smell of blood, he said so directly, "Your Highness, this is my seat." Carlos said. Li Tianlan suddenly laughed. Judging from his appearance, he really had nothing to do with the word handsome. He had a very ordinary face. Because he was young, he was slightly delicate. But at this time when Li Tianlan laughed, he had an unparalleled style, cold and awe-inspiring. He looked back at the high-level officials in the conference room and said calmly, "Who can testify?" At this moment Li Tianlan stood there. Even though he was seriously injured and pale, he still had a kind of domineering aura. He was awe-inspiring. The whole conference room was silent. No matter if they were in favor of war or peace, no one made a sound when their president was asked to give up his seat. Secretive politicians, iron-blooded generals, everyone's blood seemed to freeze with the death of General Zhou. Of course, humiliation would be embarrassing. But living was more important than anything else. It was anything else. Carlos's eyes swept across every high-level official in the conference room. Every one of the higher-ups who met his gaze subconsciously turned their heads away. Even the prime minister turned his head. Carlos's face was a little pale. In a short period of time he only got one feeling when he looked at everyone. The feeling of being betrayed. Li Tianlan's fingers tapped on the table unhurriedly and said calmly, "Stand up." His voice was very soft. However, Carlos could see an undisguised killing intent in his eyes. Carlos finally clearly realized the identity of the other party. The other party was the marshal in the special warfare system of Zhou state, not belonging to the military. He was the youngest highness in the dark world. He was a madman who broke the deadlock in Eastern Europe without hesitation. In one day 3 invincible realm experts died and 2 of them were killed by him. Now that he had the most elite army in the world, he was almost undefeatable. The youngest prince. The most elite army. The former conquered Rekvia in a single day. The latter defeated Wulan state in one day. He was invincible. Carlos slowly stood up. He looked at many high-level officials who lowered their heads as if they could not see this scene and smiled self-mockingly. "Today you not only gave up on me but also on Wulan state." No one would support him, the president who was forced to give up his position in his own mansion. After today he was destined to step down. But who would these people who still sat at the top of Wulan state represent in the future? Carlos suddenly realized that he was no longer qualified to think about this question. He slowly turned around and walked out the door. A voice rang out behind him. "Stop right there." Carlos's body stiffened. He turned to look at Li Tianlan and asked, "Your Highness, what can I do for you?" Before today, Zhou state and Wulan state had always been close friends, Li Tianlan said calmly. There can be misunderstandings between friends. After that, it's nothing more than an apology and a meal to solve the problem. However, misunderstandings between countries could lead to death. The Jiang family of South America intends to get involved in Wulan state and even wants to set off a political revolution here. For the sake of the stability of Wulan state, I rushed hundreds of miles away, but I was regarded as an enemy by Wulan state. Li Tianlan laughed. His smile was cold and ferocious. The luxurious conference table began to collapse silently. Wood chips flew everywhere. As the sword energy swept through, a large amount of dust fell to the ground. More than 2,000 elite soldiers were buried in Eastern Europe. Is this all because of our enthusiasm? Zhou state has the feelings of a great country, but does my army deserve to die? Wulan state, Oga state and Ross state should be mainly responsible for this matter. You don't give me an explanation but ask me what else I want? What else do you want? Jerosis instinctively sensed the danger. This kind of danger did not come from Li Tianlan's killing intent, but from the instinct of being in a high position and used to seeing countless conspiracies. His palm trembled subconsciously and he forced himself to calm down and said, "Prime Minister Rieker can give you the explanation that your Highness wants." Riker, who had been extremely silent since Li Tianlan appeared, suddenly raised his head and looked at Li Tianlan. His eyes were a little nervous and even a little pleading. General Tostel, the new patriarch of Rekvia, put a cup of coffee in front of Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan picked it up and took a sip. In a short period of time, countless eyes in the conference room met and intertwined, and the atmosphere became extremely strange. Li Tianlan glanced thoughtfully at Prime Minister Riker, who was tense, and then shook his head. He looked at Carlos and said lightly, "I only want to talk to you about this matter." Prime Minister Riker, who had been in a cold sweat in a short period of time, breathed a sigh of relief. He looked at Li Tianlan and there was a flash of gratitude in his eyes. No matter how absurd Li Tianlan's previous words were, at least he wanted Wulan State to give him an explanation. This matter was true. And this matter was very normal. Li Tianlan won tonight. If Jiang Qiansong won tonight, he would also want an explanation. The key was that such an explanation was easy to give, but also not easy to give. It was understandable that Li Tianlan wanted an explanation. But who dared to talk to Li Tianlan at the top of Wulan State? Whoever talked would die. Zhou State was under great pressure in one day. More than 2,000 soldiers were sacrificed, and they encountered a Li family that desperately needed all kinds of strength. The price that Li Tianlan was about to offer, the so-called explanation he wanted, would definitely be unimaginably high. Ceding land, indemnities, and all kinds of conditions were enough to be recorded in the history of Wulan State. The saddest thing was that there was almost no room for bargaining with Li Tianlan in today's Wulan State. The Snowdance Corps dispatched only 5,000 elites. They acted in batches. 3,000 people directly defeated half of Wulan State's military force without heavy firepower. If 20,000 people of the Snowdance Corps were dispatched at the same time, what would happen? Under such circumstances, no matter what Li Tianlan asked, Wulan State could only accept it. Whoever represented Wulan State to talk to Li Tianlan about this matter would have his name recorded in the history of Wulan State. It was not to be recorded in history. The price to pay for losing power and humiliating a country was to be infamous for thousands of years. There were only two people present who were most qualified to be infamous for thousands of years. One was President Carlos. The other was Prime Minister Riker. Li Tianlan chose Carlos. From this moment on, Riker knew that he was safe and Carlos was completely abandoned. Zhou State abandoned Carlos. They needed someone with enough prestige to take control of the current situation. Riker was the only candidate. He could even become the president and become a key pawn for Li Tianlan to stay in Wulan State to check and balance Rekvia. At this moment, everything could be said to be a national disaster for Wulan State. But Prime Minister Riker suddenly found that his future might be infinitely beautiful. He froze in place and his thoughts were complicated. For a moment he seemed to have forgotten how much he needed to pay for this kind of beauty. "Your Highness," Carlos suddenly emphasized, "this is Wulan State." "State?" "Yes," Li Tianlan said calmly, "By Wulan State." Carlos suddenly felt powerless. He stood in place with a blank face and his heart was as dead as ashes. "I can't represent Zhou State fully, but here I can represent the Snowdance Corps and the Arctic Ocean Command. So from my personal standpoint I have two requirements. First, within 3 days hand over the bodies of all the victims of the Snowdance Corps. They fought for Wulan State but were killed by Wulan State. The compensation for each martyr in each country must not be less than 2 million yuan. Second, withdraw your accusation at the United Nations, apologize to Zhou State at the United Nations meeting, clarify the misunderstanding and expose the conspiracy of the Jiang family of South America. Zhou State will be responsible for protecting the security of Wulan State and avoiding a repeat of today's incident. Wulan State is obliged to establish a garrison base for Zhou State. As a witness of the reconciliation of the two countries, the star flag of Zhou State must be seen wherever the flag of Wulan State can be seen in the future. Third, Your Highness, you said that you only had 2 requirements. A high-level official finally couldn't help but stand up. His face was extremely angry and his eyes were full of shame. But his voice was extremely weak and he seemed to be a little timid and out of breath. Li Tianlan glanced at him, thought for a moment and said, "Did I say that?" The high-level official opened his mouth. Just as he was about to speak, Li Tianlan said expressionlessly, "Shut up." If you don't shut up, I'll make you close your eyes. The pale high-level official slowly sat down. Li Tianlong was silent for a while. He seemed to forget what he wanted to say. He shook his head, waved his hand and said, "That's all. These are my requirements. Who agrees and who objects?" There was silence. But an unprecedented heaviness suddenly pressed on the hearts of every high-level official. Wulan State, which the Arctic Ocean Command had been trying to penetrate for more than 20 years, was finally lost. The loss to Wulan State was completely unimaginable. And everyone knew that this was only Li Tianlong's own request, not Zhongzhou State's. Li Tianlong asked for a lot, or it could be said to be very little, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Zhongzhou State would definitely take away all the things that should be taken away. But no one in the conference room spoke. No one dared. At this extremely delicate moment, as the winner, what Li Tianlong said was the law. Whoever dared to speak, Li Tianlong would definitely make him close his eyes. Li Tianlong waited for a while. Seeing that no one spoke, he nodded and said directly, "The meeting is over." Again no one objected. The high-level officials stood up one by one and walked out of the conference room in turn. President Carlos did not leave. Prime Minister Rieker did not leave either. Qin Shilai, who followed Li Tianlong in, nodded to Li Tianlong, followed Tostel out of the conference room, and closed the door of the conference room. There were only Li Tianlong and the two highest authorities of Wulan State in the entire conference room. "You're very smart." Li Tianlong looked at Prime Minister Rieker and said calmly. The Prime Minister, who had never bowed to anyone in Wulan State, bowed deeply to Li Tianlong and did not get up for a long time. Li Tianlong casually pointed at the coffee cup in front of him. Rieker stood up, took the cup and walked to the coffee machine. Li Tianlong glanced at Carlos and said calmly, "Sit down." Carlos seemed to have completely calmed down. He slowly sat on the chair next to Li Tianlong. "Rieker, you're right." "Yes. But not enough." Li Tianlong said slowly, "Zhongzhou State needs a dog that's obedient enough." "It's you who needs a dog that's obedient enough, isn't it?" Carlos looked at Li Tianlong and asked sarcastically. Li Tianlong smiled and did not speak. Carlos was silent for a while and said softly, "Will I die tonight?" His tone was subtle and complicated. Li Tianlong looked at him for a while and then said blandly, "Any last words?" Divine Emperor of Nine Heavens. Chapter 464. Carlos was silent for a long time. The situation in Wulan State changed in a day. He had thought of many endings and different endings. But before Li Tianlong stepped into the conference room, he did not think that he would die. Death. Permanent darkness. Great shame. Monstrous infamy. All of this would fall on him with his death, followed by a series of words that did not sound good, such as cowardice, incompetence, greed, and stupidity. His life, his reputation, and everything about him would be completely polluted and painted black, and there would be no possibility of washing it. In such a case, the so-called last words. "Is it meaningful?" Carlos asked. "It's meaningless." Li Tianlong shook his head. "But before you die, if you are willing to say something, I can be a listener." This was the only thing Li Tianlong could do. He needed a very significant death to calm the great changes in Wulan State and completely nail the Jiang family of South America. The withdrawal of the Jiang family of South America. The advance of Zhongzhou State. The compromise and concession of Wulan State. All the crimes, all the inside stories, and all the shame needed to be borne by someone. President Carlos was the best candidate. His death would make everyone, including the people of Wulan State, have to accept the strong entry of the Snowdance Corps of Zhongzhou State into Wulan State. At the same time, it could also eliminate some pressure of international public opinion. Li Tianlong had no grudge against Carlos. But now the general trend wanted him to die. He could only die. "Do you dare to kill me?" Carlos stared into Li Tianlong's eyes. Death was close at hand, but it did not come. The tension lingering between life and death was like a hot torrent, rushing into his abdomen, all the way up his abdomen and squeezing into his mind. Carlos's body was trembling slightly and his eyes were red. "Jiang Qiansong killed you," Li Tianlong whispered. "I tried to save you, but I didn't succeed. You were attacked and sacrificed by the Jiang family of South America, and I saved Wulan State at the most critical moment." "Lies. They're all lies. They're vulnerable," Carlos yelled. "Lies are good for ruling." Li Tianlong's voice was full of indifference. You despicable, cruel, shameless, hypocritical invader. Carlos' breathing became more and more rapid. You deserve to die. Mr. President, please pay attention to your words. His Highness and the Xianxia state represented by His Highness are eternal friends of Wulan state. Prime Minister Riker walked over with a wooden tray. On the tray was a cup of warm coffee and a steak made by the Prime Minister himself. Rick respectfully placed the tray in front of Li Tianlan. He turned around and looked into Carlos's eyes, which were burning with anger. He was extremely calm. You can say whatever you want. Li Tianlan cut a piece of steak and put it into his mouth. He lost a lot of blood after being seriously injured. He just dealt with the wound briefly and then came to the office of the president. Now his body was getting colder and colder and he could hardly taste anything in his mouth. He bit the beef seriously and said calmly, "But I want to correct you too. From now on the Snowdance Corps and I are not friends of Wulan state but rulers." Prime Minister Riker's body stiffened slightly for a moment, and then he said respectfully, "Your Highness is right." Prime Minister. Carlos's voice was twisted and crazed. "You're wrong again." Li Tianlan said calmly, "He is not the Prime Minister." Carlos glanced at Li Tianlan and sneered without saying a word. Li Tianlan nodded and took out a very ordinary pistol from his pocket. "It seems that you have nothing to say." He raised his hand and threw the gun to Prime Minister Riker. He threw the gun to Prime Minister Riker, but he said in another capacity, "President Riker, kill him." Riker's whole body shook. He caught the pistol and his arms couldn't help trembling. Li Tianlan took out his mobile phone and aimed it at the two of them. He turned on the video mode and then focused on the steak in front of him. "The steak is not big enough." His soft voice echoed in the conference room like the whisper of the devil. "If you don't kill him before I finish eating, I will kill you too." Riker's violently trembling palm held the pistol tightly and subconsciously aimed at Carlos. Carlos's face was pale, but his eyes were still burning with anger when he looked at Riker. Riker's arm trembled like a convulsion. At this moment he might be holding the unprecedented sin in his life. But at the same time, as long as he pulled the trigger, he would get the power that he had never touched in his life. "I'm sorry." Riker's voice was a little hoarse. It sounded ferocious and empty in the claustrophobic conference room. Behind him was the sound of the knife and fork rubbing against the porcelain plate, which sounded extremely evil. Riker took a step forward. The muzzle was against Carlos's forehead. In the clear sound, Li Tianlan put down the knife and fork. Puff. The pistol with a silencer made a dull sound. The powerful bullet directly smashed Carlos's head. Fresh blood gushed to the ceiling like a crimson fountain, incomparably beautiful. Red blood beads splashed out and splashed on the plate in front of Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took a sip of coffee, picked up his mobile phone and looked at the video. He nodded and said, "It's very clear. Do you want to have a look, Mr. President?" Riker, who was covered in blood, shook his head with a pale face. He opened his mouth and finally couldn't help but retch. He held the trash can in the conference room and vomited. Li Tianlan waited for him to finish vomiting before he ordered, "There is a star flag of Xianxia state outside the conference room. Before dawn I want to see it hung in the highest and most obvious position in Wulan City." Riker, who was weak but had an abnormal blush on his face, nodded and said in a trembling voice, "As you wish, Your Highness." Li Tianlan nodded and put away the mobile phone that had recorded the scene just now. He casually touched Riker's head and said expressionlessly, "Do a good job. I have high hopes for you." It was not until they entered the highest hotel in Reki City and entered the luxury suite that Wang Tianzong, who had been silent all the way, took the initiative to break the silence and asked, "Do you blame me?" King Tong, who had been following Wang Tianzong silently, shook her head. "I didn't know that Li Tianlan had two murderous weapons." Wang Tianzong gave an extremely rare explanation. King Tong said, looking extremely docile. Wang Tianzong turned around and walked to the balcony of the room, looking at the brightly lit Reki City in the night. Among the countless lights, a building not far away was particularly bright. It was wrapped in light and looked extremely majestic. That was the office of the president, the power center of Wulan state. At this moment Li Tianlan should be there. Wang Tianzong looked in that direction with a calm face. "He's very good." King Tong stood behind Wang Tianzong. Her emotions seemed to have completely adjusted, or perhaps she had deliberately suppressed them. "No wonder Yue Tong likes him." Yes. Wang Tianzong nodded. But he deserves to die. King Tong reached out and touched her red lips. Her red lips were full and enchanting, but there was still the coldness and the taste of death that belonged to murderous weapons between her lips and teeth. King Tong narrowed her eyes, and a shocking evil spirit suddenly flashed in her golden eyes. Yes. Wang Tianzong nodded again. However, King Tong clearly felt that the other party was not perfunctory, but was saying this very seriously. If Li Tianlong didn't hold back his sword tonight, what would have happened? King Tong suddenly asked. Li Tianlong's martial arts was the real road of the chosen one. In terms of level, his sword intent was better than Wang Tianzong, Deity and Lin Fengting. However, his sword energy was not enough and his power was not strong enough for the time being. But tonight, Deity's sword energy and Li Tianlong's sword intent were combined. That was equivalent to the fusion of the Chosen One's sword intent and the sword energy of the peak of the invincible realm. Their swordsmanship was of the same origin. This was almost equivalent to the sword that Li Tianlong stabbed when he entered the peak of the invincible realm. Wang Tianzong was very strong. But at that time he was unprepared. If he didn't hold back that sword, the possibility of Wang Tianzong being seriously injured in an instant was infinitely close to 100%. What would have happened then? King Tong suddenly felt a sense of fear in her heart. It's hard to say. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and said blandly, if he had attacked with all his strength, he would have died, Deity would have died, and I would have been seriously injured. The possibility of breaking through again would have been zero, and I might even have fallen into the invincible realm. At that time, the chaos in Eastern Europe would have nothing to do with the Wang family of Beihai or Zhongzhou state. Beihai could get most of the benefits of the Li family and the giant group. But Beihai would also have to face countless people who would hit him when he was down. This was undoubtedly a very complicated consequence. And with so many complications added up, it was really hard to say what the final result would be. However, King Tong heard something different from this answer. She felt a little incredible and couldn't help but widen her eyes. Do you mean that you still have the possibility of continuing to break through? Now Wang Tianzong had surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. If he broke through again, he could only be the chosen one. There was a flash of surprise in King Tong's eyes. Can you still break through at your age? Wang Tianzong shook his head and then nodded. Above the peak of the invincible realm, it has nothing to do with age. To be exact, martial arts has little to do with age. The age of 40 is a recognized threshold. But over the years, there have been people who have broken through to the invincible realm at the age of 40. They are very few. But as long as there is one, even if there is one, it is enough to explain the problem. As for my current state, I can't describe it in detail. But now it's a very critical time. I'm not sure if I can take the last step. At present, I still need an opportunity. No wonder, King Tong murmured. No wonder you didn't do anything tonight. Wang Tianzong was about to break through. In this case, he naturally had to maintain the peak state and silently look for his own opportunity. Not entirely for this reason. Wang Tianzong said, in today's dark world I can confirm that I am the strongest. But I am also sure that I am not invincible. This sentence was very heavy and bitter. Wang Tianzong was indeed the strongest, but he was not so strong that no one could pose a threat to him, so he didn't do anything tonight. If he took the last half step in martial arts tonight, even if he didn't do anything to Li Tianlong, at least Deity wouldn't be able to leave anyway. Wang Tianzong sighed softly and there was a flash of unwillingness in his eyes. I believe in you. You can definitely take the last step, King Tong said softly. King Tong said softly. Her golden pupils were shining with undisguised worship and admiration, which were brilliant and charming. Wang Tianzong smiled and looked at the brightly lit office of the president in his sight. He was silent for a long time. The deadlock in Eastern Europe has been broken. After a long time he said slowly. A cell phone suddenly rang. Wang Tianzong took out his cell phone and looked at it. It was a very short message, but the content was not simple. General Zhou is dead. Wang Tianzong raised his eyebrows in surprise. He looked at his cell phone and there seemed to be wind and clouds gathering in his eyes. After the deadlock there is still a deadlock. He put away his cell phone and shook his head. It's really boring. Chapter 465. Carlos's blood flowed unscrupulously in different directions in the conference room. The blood soaked the thick carpet and the smell of blood was everywhere in the conference room. A minute ago Riker, who had just committed the biggest crime in his life, moved his body. His feet stepped on the blood-soaked carpet, making the sound of water. All consciousness began to gradually return to the blank brain. Riker subconsciously threw away the pistol in his hand. His whole body trembled and he was at a loss, but he did not dare to make a sound. The conference room was quiet. Li Tianlan, who had put away his mobile phone, sat there and seemed to be thinking about something. Prime Minister Riker, who was completely confused, looked at Li Tianlan subconsciously. That gunshot not only ended Carlos' life, but it also ended all of his positions. He got on Li Tianlan's boat. Now that he was out of his wits, the only one he could rely on was Li Tianlan. "Your Highness." Riker took a deep breath and summoned up the courage to call out. There was no hatred or shame in his eyes, only a kind of fear and panic that he wanted to hide but couldn't. It was clear. Li Tianlan said slowly, "Zhou State won't talk to you too soon. There are a lot of things to discuss at home, and you need to stabilize the situation here as soon as possible. Do you understand what I mean?" Riker nodded, only feeling that his body was stiffer than ever. Li Tianlan's words were not obvious, but the content was extremely cruel. It was not until this moment that he really understood what the war that would push him to the position of president meant. He gained power, but what he lost was autonomy. What happened that day could be explained in many ways. But no matter how it was explained, it could not change the nature of this matter. Li Tianlan wanted to retaliate against the Jiang family of South America. Wuxia, which had a good relationship with the Jiang family of South America, used its power to snipe Li Tianlan. The 5 Eastern European countries declared war on Zhou State under the strong influence of Wuxia. In the end, Li Tianlan won. Zhou State came and Wulan State lost. It was so simple. That was the essence. This was not the most naked invasion. It could even be said that Wulan State courted its own death. If they had not declared war on Zhou State, even if Li Tianlan wanted to occupy Wulan State by force, there would be no tenable reason. But Wulan State participated in it, but what they got was indeed the most thorough failure. Therefore, from today on, Wulan State would no longer have real independent power. Only the young man in the conference room was the master of Wulan State and even the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. Behind this nature, there was bound to be even more naked, yet even more obscure compensation, exploitation, oppression, bloodshed, and cruelty. This was the price that the losing side had to pay after losing the war. Zhou State would not talk to Wulan State in a short time. There was no doubt that Zhou State itself needed to negotiate internally on how to divide up Wulan State. Perhaps in a few days, countless money would flow into Zhou State from Wulan State as war reparations. Meanwhile, countless wealthy families, military forces and dark forces in Zhou State would pour in quietly and become the most powerful class in this country. The future was completely predictable. Therefore it seemed exceptionally cruel. Rick's vision was a little dizzy. He forced himself to stand up straight, but his head was buzzing. Li Tianlan still sat there quietly motionless. A phone suddenly rang and it sounded a little ear-piercing in the silent conference room. Rick's body trembled. He found his phone in a daze and looked at the caller ID. There was a name on the caller ID. General Dessa. The name was familiar. But Rick, who was completely confused, couldn't remember who it was for a while. Rick's mouth twitched and he tried to think of the so-called general. The phone continued to ring and it seemed to be getting more and more urgent, which made people panic. "Don't answer it," Li Tianlan suddenly said. His body didn't move and his tone was very light but extremely tough. Rick, who was about to answer the phone subconsciously, suddenly remembered who General Dessa was. General Dessa of Wulan State, the head of the military in the southwest. In the southwest of Wulan State, it bordered Oga State. In other words, today the 3,000 elites of the Snowdance Corps swept all the way. They were swept by several large elite corps under the command of General Dessa. Rick's face was pale and bloodless. Because he suddenly remembered that the Snowdance Corps that set off from Im to Wulan State was not only 3,000 people. It was 5,000. 3,000 lightly armed people marched forward quickly. In the rear, there were 2,000 heavy firepower troops armed to the teeth with a large number of weapons. How big was the difference between 3,000 lightly armed elites and 2,000 fully armed elites? How big was the gap between Zhou State and Wulan State in terms of armaments? If he guessed correctly, this was the time when several elite corps of Wulan State gathered the defeated troops. At the same time, It was also the time when more than 2,000 heavily armed elites of the Snowdance Corps entered Wulan State. Rick held his phone. His heart suddenly became colder than ever. "Your Highness," he called out in a trembling tone. Li Tianlan said calmly, "Give me the phone." "Your Highness." Rick's tone suddenly became excited. "We can't give up the several corps in the southwest. Without them, how can Wulan State defend? The defense of Wulan State has the Snowdance Corps. What are you afraid of?" Li Tianlan said in a cold tone. Rick only felt that a deadly rope was tightly wrapped around his neck, and he had no hope of breaking free. His legs were weak and he finally knelt on the ground. "Your Highness." He hadn't finished speaking. In his sight, Li Tianlan reached out his hand. His palm trembled slightly, but he quickly took off the translator hanging on his ear without hesitation. Then he reached out and slowly pointed to the phone in Rick's hand. Rick's eyes became completely desperate. Li Tianlan didn't understand foreign languages. He didn't even understand basic English. Without the translator, Li Tianlan couldn't understand what he was saying. The phone stopped ringing for a while. Then it rang again. The melodious ringtone sounded like thousands of ghosts screaming and roaring in Rick's ears at this time. His heart was extremely tormented. The phone kept ringing for a full 10 minutes. Then the phone didn't ring again. 10 minutes was a long time. But it was also very short. If this gap was on the battlefield, it would be so big that it would make people desperate. Rick completely broke down and burst into tears. In these 10 minutes, he didn't know what the situation of the battle was, but at least he could know what would happen to the corps directly led by General Dessa. The door of the conference room was pushed open. Cool breeze and drifting cloud came in with faint bloodstains on their bodies. Li Tianlan looked at them motionlessly. Cool breeze nodded to Li Tianlan and said softly, "Your Highness, it's all done." Li Tianlan smiled. Tonight, in the hearts of the Snowdance Corps, he was the invincible god of war. In the eyes of Wulan State, cool breeze and drifting cloud were absolute gods of death. In just a few hours, more than 30 high-level officials of Wulan State or people with great influence in a certain field died in the dark edge of Sai City. It was not until this moment that Li Tianlan really controlled Reki City. As for controlling the entire Wulan State, it was destined to take a long time. Li Tianlan glanced at Rick, who was in a daze, and his eyes were slightly mocking. "You think it's unacceptable? You think I completely gave up the war force in the southeast of Wulan State? You think I killed a lot of high-level officials tonight? But don't you think about whether those things that seem to belong to Wulan State are in Wulan State with other positions or really belong to Wulan State? For example, General Zhou just now. If he doesn't die tonight, I won't come tonight. After the chaos in Eastern Europe is over, do you know whether Wulan State's surname is Jiang Wang or something else? Is there any difference now?" Rick asked with a sad smile. "Of course there's a difference," Li Tianlan said calmly. "At least we can be sure of one thing now. Wulan State surnamed Li." Rick sat on the ground looking dull. "Your Highness, the situation outside is under control," Lu Yun reminded him without batting an eyelid. Li Tianlan nodded and looked at cool breeze and drifting cloud for a long time. His body was motionless. Cool breeze and drifting cloud's faces changed at the same time. They glanced at Rick and walked toward Li Tianlan calmly. Li Tianlan laughed. His face was very young, but his smile was very desolate with extreme exhaustion and trance. "Your Highness." Cool breeze subconsciously reached out his hand. Li Tianlan grabbed Cool breeze's arm and held it tightly. He used a lot of strength. But Cool breeze couldn't feel the slightest strength. He could only feel that Li Tianlan's arm was trembling, but he still wanted to grasp something. In an instant, Cool breeze and drifting cloud were both in a cold sweat. They missed the final battle before the Rekvia castle. They also didn't witness Li Tianlan's choice and advance and retreat when he was sandwiched between deity and Wang Tianzong. So they didn't know how Li Tianlan's injury was. But now it seemed that Li Tianlan had no strength at all. That was to say, it had been a long time before they came. Rick, who didn't know any martial arts, might be able to kill Li Tianlan easily if he was more courageous. Not to mention resisting, it was extremely difficult for Li Tianlan to even move. Cool breeze glanced at the pistol beside Rick. Drifting cloud took off a button from his clothes, crushed it and fed some of the powder to Li Tianlan. The standard healing medicine for high-level officials in Zhongzhou State had been used up, and even if it was given to Li Tianlan now, it wouldn't work. What drifting cloud fed Li Tianlan was something that could cheer him up in a short time. In layman's terms, it was a powerful stimulant for military use. This kind of thing was bound to bring a certain degree of damage to the body, and even cause Li Tianlan's injury to be more serious. But now Li Tianlan had to stand up. The future god of war of Zhou state. Under any circumstances he couldn't retreat. He couldn't fall down. The dry powder gradually melted. A sickly blush flashed across Li Tianlan's face. His palm gradually gained strength. Letting go of Cool Breeze's hand, he slowly stood up and said in a dead and hoarse voice, "Let's go and raise the flag." Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud subconsciously wanted to help him. Li Tianlan shook his head and walked out of the conference room. His steps were slow, but when he tried to control his body, his steps were extremely steady. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud followed Li Tianlan closely to prevent him from suddenly falling down. They could only see Li Tianlan's back in their sight. That back was so lonely, heavy and slow, as if he was carrying the whole world on his back. But what he carried on his shoulders, Ingrua's shoulders, was not just a world. The office of the president was not the tallest place in Reki City. But there was the tallest flagpole in Reki City in front of the gate of the office of the president. In this extremely open area, the flag of Wulan province flying day and night was the most eye-catching symbol. When Li Tianlan walked out of the office of the president with Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, it was almost late at night, and there was almost a sea of people outside the office of the president. The flashes of the cameras were constantly flashing and the police cars were maintaining order. Reporters from all countries stationed in Wulan state swarmed there after receiving the notice. Li Tianlan's appearance did not attract the attention of any reporter. He did not wear a military uniform. He wore a temporary black suit without a military rank. No one knew that the young man who passed by them was the marshal of the Snowdance Corps of Zhou state. All the cameras were focused on Li Zhonghu. To be exact, they were gathered on the huge star flag in Li Zhonghu's hand. The scene was busy and silent. The star flag became the most dazzling in the night sky. Color. Hundreds of elites of the Snowdance Corps lined up neatly on the square in front of the office of the president. The whole night seemed to be filled with the fierce fighting intent that had not dissipated. Li Tianlan walked into the crowd calmly and looked at the gate of the office of the president quietly. He was waiting for Riker. Everyone was waiting for Riker. As a veteran politician who had been in politics for decades, Li Tianlan completely believed in Riker's psychological quality and believed that he could adjust his state in the shortest time. At least he could cope with the current situation. Cool Breeze whispered in his ear the number of media present at this moment. All the media were informed through the channels of Samsara Palace in Eastern Europe. Nearly 40 media outlets were informed. Now there were more than 35 media outlets present, most of which were foreign media. Li Tianlan remained calm. Tonight he wanted to let the star flag of Zhou state flutter in Eastern Europe and in front of the office of the president in Wulan state, the most sensitive geographical location, under the eyes of the whole world. Li Tianlan watched the scene quietly. His vision had become a little blurred, but in his sight the red color of the star flag was still breathtaking. The front door of the office of the president was slowly pulled open. The reporters who had been silent all the time suddenly burst into a hubbub. The flashes finally began to shift from the star flag. Countless reporters rushed over crazily. Riker, the Prime Minister of Wulan state, walked out of the office of the president with a pale face and some tears on his face. His face was solemn and heavy. "Mr. Prime Minister, Reki City is very unfortunate today. Is all this really related to Zhou state? Should Zhou state take full responsibility for this? Mr. Prime Minister, has Wulan state completely severed diplomatic relations with Zhou state? Do you have any views on the future development of the two countries? Mr. Prime Minister, why didn't Mr. President show up? Crazy flashing lights. All kinds of questions. Faces with different expressions kept flashing in front of Riker. This press conference was not formal, but it was very effective. It was enough to spread to all corners of the world in the shortest time. So Riker knew very well that from this moment on, every word he said would resound all over the world. At this moment he suddenly thought of a sentence. Tell a big lie and let the whole world dance with it. Riker suddenly laughed at himself. He did want to tell a big lie recently and let the whole world dance with it, but he would also dance with it. The young and ambitious man who was watching coldly behind the wall of the big lie was not him. Everyone. Rieker took a deep breath, took the microphone and said slowly, "Before answering your questions, I would like to announce a very regrettable thing first. Mr. President Carlos, the greatest and wisest leader of Wulan State, my former best friend, my former life mentor, and the person I once respected the most, has sacrificed himself." There was a sudden silence in front of the office of the president, leaving only the sound of the wind. The next second, an incredible exclamation exploded like an ignited gunpowder keg. Everyone was thinking and asking the same question. Did Xianxia State do it? It's a misunderstanding. Rieker said seriously, Wulan State and Xianxia State have always been friends. It's just that Wulan State was used today, which led to Wulan State's irrational behavior of declaring war on a friend. If time could go back, I would definitely stop this from happening. Mr. Prime Minister, what's the misunderstanding? Well, maybe we have to find the reason from Mr. President. There are many things between him and the Jiang family of South America that need to be investigated and collected evidence. We all need time. Mr. President? My God, how is this possible? You just said that he was the person you respected the most. Yes. He used to be. The square in front of the office of the president was completely crazy. Countless reporters almost screamed and asked questions. Li Tianlan could no longer hear it clearly. The last thing he vaguely heard was the national anthem of Xianxia State that sounded in the land of Eastern Europe. Li Zhonghu held the star flag tightly in his hand and sent it to the most dazzling place in Reki City. The red flag kept fluttering in the night wind and became the most dazzling color in the night sky. It was the early morning of August 8th in Eastern Europe. The day known as the date of death finally passed. Reki City, which had been in chaos for a day, announced several pieces of news to the world. President Carlos was suspected of treason and had secret cooperation with the Jiang family of South America. The Jiang family of South America and Carlos took advantage of Wulan State and almost destroyed the friendly diplomatic relationship between Wulan State and Xianxia State. The cooperation between Carlos and the Jiang family of South America broke down. Jiang Qiansong, the patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, became angry and killed Carlos. He even wanted to kill all the high-level officials of Wulan State. At the critical moment, Marshal Li Tianlan of the Snowdance Corps of Xianxia State appeared and stopped the bottomless conspiracy of the Jiang family of South America. Xianxia State and Wulan State would always be best friends, and Marshal Li Tianlan was the most respected hero of Wulan State. In order to ensure the safety of Wulan State, Prime Minister Rieker sincerely invited the Snowdance Corps of Xianxia State to be stationed in Reki City for a period of time. Countless pieces of news exploded all over the world like bombs. 20 hours ago, Li Tianlan was a warmonger, an invader, and a madman. Xianxia State was under great pressure because of this. 20 hours later, Li Tianlan became the hero of Wulan State, and Xianxia State became the best friend of Wulan State. In less than a day's time, the situation had almost been completely reversed. At this moment, on the land of Wulan State, Li Tianlan and Xianxia State were shining at the same time. This was a real upheaval. The grand and clear national anthem of Xianxia State resounded throughout Wulan City with the fluttering star flag that night. In the seemingly never-ending song, Li Tianlan looked at the increasingly blurred red flag in his sight and whispered, "Cool breeze." "I'm here, Your Highness." Cool Breeze bowed slightly and said respectfully. Li Tianlan pointed to the direction where the flag was fluttering and said hoarsely, "This is my flag." "Yes, Your Highness." Cool Breeze replied in a firm tone. "This is my flag. It is also my country." Divine Emperor of Nine Heavens. Chapter 466. In the huge square in front of the office of the president, the national anthem of Xianxia State sounded all night. The bright red and gorgeous star flag flew in the passionate music and was reflected in the eyes of the media all over the world, like the only color in the night. The blood in the city gradually dried up, and the raging fire began to extinguish. The war and turmoil gradually subsided as the night passed. The bright and bustling lights went out one by one, and the glimmer lit up in the deepest darkness. A gust of morning wind blew away the darkness, and the hazy dawn was a little wet. The rain dripped down and the whole city was cold. Wang Tianzong stood on the balcony of the hotel all night, and the star flag in front of the office of the president also fluttered in his pupils all night. The rain, which was getting heavier, fell on his head and soaked the extremely luxurious open-air balcony. Wang Tianzong, who was motionless like a statue, suddenly raised his head and looked at the sky. The sky was gloomy. The rain was messy. The whole world was cold and desolate. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath. There was no sword intent around him and there was no fluctuation in the space. Under his extremely natural gaze, the sky hundreds of meters around him suddenly calmed down, and all the rain was completely evaporated. He stood on the balcony, surrounded by falling rain, but the place where he stood was dry and warm. The sound of footsteps came from behind him. King Tong, who had just gotten up, walked over in her pajamas. She handed Wang Tianzong a glass of warm water and whispered, "It's raining." "Yes." Wang Tianzong nodded, took the water glass and drank some water. "You didn't sleep all night?" King Tong asked. After a night's sleep, King Tong's mental state had completely recovered from the frustration of last night. She was no longer afraid and shocked, but this morning, King Tong was not as arrogant, enchanting and powerful as she used to be. In front of Wang Tianzong, King Tong had never been a queen. Her eyes were fixed on Wang Tianzong's face and she looked a little charming and gorgeous. Wang Tianzong shook his head. "I'm not sleepy." Last night King Tong slept in his room while he stood on the balcony all night. "I just got up. Would you like to go to sleep?" King Tong blinked and invited him with a chuckle, looking ambiguous. Wang Tianzong might have been used to this kind of ambiguity, so he was indifferent and acted as if he hadn't heard it and didn't give any response. "What does the Shadow Throne plan to do next?" Wang Tianzong put the quilt on the balcony. The rain curtain all over the sky began to shrink slowly. The rain fell into the cup, bringing about ripples. But the place where they stood was still dry and warm. "I want to stay in Reki City." King Tong thought for a while and said. Although she had suffered great humiliation last night, she had to stay in Reki City, no matter from the development of the situation or from the standpoint of wanting to get back at them. "You can stay, but you can't do anything for the time being," Wang Tianzong said slowly. King Tong was a little confused. The great change in Reki City happened in a hurry, and the Shadow Throne did not have time to mobilize too much power at all. That was why King Tong came alone, and in the end she ended up in an extremely embarrassing situation. But King Tong did not lose confidence. She did not rank high on the divine list, but the Shadow Throne, which was supported by many European powers and wealthy families, could definitely be said to be one of the most terrifying superpowers in the world. If she brought this power to any place, it would be enough to change the general trend. As I said, after the stalemate there will be another stalemate. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes. Wulan State had always been a sore point of Zhongzhou State. Moreover, the special geographical location of this country had always been a coveted target of all the major forces. The Wang family of Beihai had been secretly operating in Wulan State for several years. General Zhou, whose influence in the military of Wulan State was second only to General Tostel, was the most important pawn of the Wang family of Beihai in Wulan State. But General Zhou was dead. Wang Tianzong didn't get the news until it was close to early morning. General Zhou was not the only one who died. Some of General Zhou's trusted subordinates were all assassinated. In other words, all the contacts of the Wang family of Beihai that had been secretly operating in Wulan State for many years had almost been wiped out. It was straightforward, neat, precise and decisive. It was Sai City who did it. Wang Tianzong didn't doubt the ability of cool breeze and drifting cloud. The deterrent power of assassins at their level was no less than that of ordinary invincible realm experts under certain circumstances. They could definitely do it. But Wang Tianzong didn't understand where they got such a precise list. All the foundations of the Wang family of Beihai in Wulan State were cut off and destroyed overnight, leaving almost nothing. How precise must that list be in order to achieve this kind of effect? This feeling was like the information that Qin Weibai handed to Summer Solstice during the final maneuver of the Sky Academy. There were some things that Wang Tianzong was not the only one who knew. But those who knew these things had no reason or position to betray him at all. So no matter how he looked at it, there was no possibility of these materials being leaked. So how did Li Tianlong know this list? Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and muttered to himself, "I can't be quiet and I can't move. This feeling is really uncomfortable?" King Tong asked. Wang Tianzong nodded. Yes. Everything at the moment was a stalemate for Wang Tianzong. He was now the strongest sword emperor in the dark world, but in the real general trend he would inevitably become the target that everyone wanted to kill. as he said he was the strongest and everyone knew it. But he was not absolutely invincible and everyone knew it. His sword might tear the current situation into pieces, but if he acted rashly he could kill deity and Li Tianlan. Lin Fengting was no match for him and neither was Arsis. He could do it. But once he did it, the final winner would not be the Wang family of Beihai. The Dark World was the cruelest and darkest Jianghu. In Jianghu one could be happy and free? It was all bullshit. The major forces were constantly overturning. The conflicts between the major forces were never for killing. Killing was just a necessary means, not the end. The purpose of all the forces was for interests. How could the major forces who were entangled by interests talk about being free and unfettered? This was a very obvious matter. Wang Tianzong was stronger than anyone, but if he killed someone and got no benefits it would be meaningless. He was stronger than anyone. So he could kill deity. If he went all out he could even kill Lin Fengting. In today's dark world, only these two people could pose a fatal threat to him. He could get rid of these two threats. But after getting rid of these two threats in his seriously injured state, maybe all the invincible realm experts would become his new threats. There were more and more threats. The trouble was getting bigger and bigger. In the end what he could get was failure, an extremely tragic failure. This was not what Wang Tianzong wanted. He just wanted to win. What are you going to do? King Tong asked. I don't know. Wang Tianzong shook his head. At present there are only two ways. One is to wait for the right time to appear. The other is to break through and go further. General Zhou's team was originally an important bargaining chip for the Wang family of Beihai to promote the situation in Wulan State and even Eastern Europe. Even if Li Tianlan occupied Eastern Europe now, as long as he had Zhou, Wang Tianzong could also create many opportunities. But Zhou was dead. Without a bargaining chip, it was difficult for Wang Tianzong to do anything inside Wulan State in a short time. And he did not dare to make a move now. When the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State did not make a move, he was at his strongest. At this time there would only be a few threats around him. But once he made a move he might be surrounded by threats. So he could only wait for other forces to make a move, and then make a move at the most perfect time to get the benefits he wanted the most. Or wait for his own breakthrough. He could make a breakthrough at any time. As long as he completely broke through the invincible realm and reached that new realm he could sweep the entire dark world by himself. At that time the Wang family of Beihai would not need any conspiracy, and it would ignore any conspiracy. The sharpness of the listen to the sea sword was unbridled. Wherever the sword light passed it was either surrender or death. Only the invincible realm was invincible. If he could break through again, all the deadlocks would be meaningless in his eyes. Wang Tianzong looked at the rainy sky and did not speak for a long time. Now he wanted to move but there was no right opportunity. He could not move and did not dare to move. He wanted to be quiet and wait for his breakthrough. But how could he really calm down when the situation in Eastern Europe was changing? He could not be quiet or move. The movement could only make his heart more and more chaotic. Let me do it. King Tong suddenly said. Her voice was very erratic. The three short words suddenly became firm in the end. Wang Tianzong glanced at her. How about the Shadow Throne make a move first? King Tong said. Since it was a deadlock, it proved that there was no chance for the time being. But the opportunity would come sooner or later. The deadlock would be broken sooner or later. All of this was uncontrollable. In this case the Shadow Throne would be the one to break the deadlock. At least it could control some of the initial situations, which was also an advantage. Of course all of this was from the standpoint of the Wang family of Beihai. King Tong took the Shadow Throne to break the deadlock. She could only try her best to create a result that was beneficial to Wang Tianzong. What nonsense are you talking about? Wang Tianzong shook his head. All of this seemed to be good for Wang Tianzong. But he and King Tong both knew that when all the superpowers in the dark world were involved, whoever couldn't help but take the initiative to make a move first was more likely to be the first to be eliminated. The Jiang family of South America and Knights Templars were the first to make a move in Eastern Europe. Now the two invincible realm experts of the Jiang family of South America had died, and their vitality had been greatly damaged. Jiang Qiansong had left a lot of chips and left in dismay. The entire Jiang family of South America would even end up being beaten by everyone. As for Knights Templars, Chaos, the chief of knights, also died without a whole body. As a branch of the Vatican in the Dark World, once Chaos died, the meaning of the existence of the entire Knights Templars would be greatly reduced. Unless the Vatican could find another invincible realm expert with firm belief, Knights Templars would almost be useless. Without an absolutely good opportunity and absolute certainty, who would dare to make a move? It's not nonsense. King Tong said seriously, I thought about it all night. This is the best way. Those European giants won't agree. Wang Tianzong said. The Queen of the Shadow Throne was respected in the Shadow Throne. She was the master, but she could not be a dictator. No matter how powerful Rothschild was, it was impossible to forcibly reverse the will of all the giants in Western Europe. England, France, Germany, Italy, which country did not have a rich and powerful family with a long history? In terms of inheritance time, some giants even existed earlier than the Wang family of Beihai. Rothschild was much stronger than any giant. But when all the giants united, they became a force that could overturn the whole of Europe. No matter how strong Rothschild was, it did not have the strength to suppress such a force. The most important thing was that the Shadow Throne had no reason to do so. They were partners and close allies. But no one in the dark world liked to sacrifice themselves to illuminate others. I'll convince them. King Tong looked straight at Wang Tianzong's face. I'm very sober now. It's my decision to let the Shadow Throne take the lead, but it's not just because I like it. Do you understand? She took action not only because of her admiration for Wang Tianzong. There were other reasons. Because she was the queen of the Shadow Throne. Tell me your reason. Wang Tianzong turned and walked into the living room of the hotel suite. He sat on the sofa in the living room and turned on the TV. The TV was the channel of Wulan State. All channels were broadcasting the scene in front of the office of the president. The Scarlet Star flag fluttered proudly in front of the office of the president. On this day, the whole Wulan State and even the whole world were rebuking the madness of the Jiang family of South America. Wang Tianzong watched quietly. In many cases, the truth of the dark world was not important at all. What mattered was the general trend. The Jiang family of South America had lost the general trend. So, in addition to the chaos in Eastern Europe, the Jiang family of South America had also become the target of everyone's attacks and interests. As for whether Jiang Qiansong had killed President Carlos or not, who would care? Who would? The only reason is that I believe in you. King Tong hesitated. She wanted to sit next to Wang Tianzong, but in the end she sat opposite him. She looked into his eyes and her eyes were a little blurred. You're the strongest man in this era. There's nothing you can't do. I believe in that. If you say you can break through, you can definitely break through. Tianzong, I'm looking forward to that day. In my heart, there should be no obstacles in front of the Wang family of Beihai, and the sword of Beihai should not have any scruples. I always remember what Uncle Wang said to me when I first climbed Mount Dibing when I was a child. Only those who can be unscrupulous can be sharp. Wang Tianzong was in a daze. Only those who could be unscrupulous could be sharp. This was the Wang family of Beihai more than 20 years ago. At that time, the Wang family of Beihai was invincible in the world. Its sharpness shocked the world and was unparalleled in the world. The sword of the Wang family of Beihai was truly unscrupulous and arbitrary. That was the strongest sharpness. However, the sharpness that was enough to tear the whole world had completely disappeared more than 20 years ago. The Wang family of Beihai was still the strongest superpower in the dark world today. But it was no longer invincible. No matter how many reasons were behind all this, at least the reality was obvious. After Wang Tianzong became the patriarch, the Wang family of Beihai lost its unscrupulous confidence. He was the Sword Emperor and ranked first on the divine list. But the Wang family of Beihai, which was supported by him alone, did not return to its former peak state after all. He gave everything and burned himself desperately, but he could clearly sense that the Wang family of Beihai was slowly declining from its peak. The speed of this decline was very slow, but it really existed. No emotion could describe the anxiety and pressure in Wang Tianzong's heart. Even Summer Solstice did not know that her husband was tired and silent when he checked whether he could still stand straight in the mirror. Because in the eyes of the world he was the Sword Emperor. He could only be the Sword Emperor. But in this era the Sword Emperor was not invincible. It's different. Wang Tianzong whispered. His voice was very soft. It's different from that time. He had broken through the invincible realm with one foot. Even before the breakthrough, Wang Tianzong could be regarded as the strongest patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai in the past 100 years. At this moment, the strength of his swordsmanship had completely surpassed his father's. But the old patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai was much calmer than him. That was why he said that the unscrupulous was the sharpness. Wang Tianzong clearly remembered how heroic his father was when he said this sentence in those days. Because at that time the Wang family of Beihai still owned the Li family. The Li family also owned the Wang family of Beihai. When the two stood side by side in Zhongzhou state, it was the unscrupulous and invincible sharpness. But now it was different. Wang Tianzong even thought more than once that if Li Tianlong could let go of some ambitions, if Li Tianlong and Wang Xingxiao could stand side by side in the next few decades, what would the Wang family of Beihai and Li Tianlong look like at that time? But it seemed that imagination could only be imagination now. The Li family collapsed. It's true that the Wang family of Beihai no longer has the Li family, but there is still Rothschild. There seemed to be a golden flame burning in King Tong's eyes, which was extremely hot. I will convince all the wealthy families of the Shadow Throne that the Shadow Throne can pay a huge price. We will give up all the interests in Eastern Europe and bet on your breakthrough. Once you successfully take the last half step, the price that the Shadow Throne paid in Eastern Europe can be recovered in Western Europe. Wang Tianzong raised his eyebrows. Western Europe. Western Europe was the concentration of all the developed countries in Europe. That was the territory of the Shadow Throne. But now, King Tong wanted to recover all the interests in her own territory. Who was her target? Who else could it be? In the whole of Western Europe, there was only one force that could not be controlled by all the wealthy families in all the countries. The Holy Land. The Vatican. King Tong straightened up. Her figure was not as plump as that of Europeans. Instead it was a little slender. But at this time she stood there with an indescribable valiance. It should be recorded in the history of our two clans. In the past 500 years, there have been at least more than 200 years in the world. The Wang family of Beihai and Rothschild are playing the leading roles. That history was very long. But for such a huge family as Rothschild, everyone understood their history and their relationship with the Wang family of Beihai. In the heyday of the chosen one ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai, a female patriarch appeared in Rothschild. And the female patriarch gave birth to a child for the ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai. Then in the flow of history the ancestor of the Lin clan appeared. Then the Lin clan hid from the world. The chosen one who founded Beihai passed away. Time surged forward like a huge wave. In that era and several eras, the extremely powerful Wang family of Beihai and Rothschild played the leading roles in the world. In the heyday of Rothschild, 2 popes of the Vatican came from this family. However, a change about 200 years ago almost completely overturned the situation in which Rothschild ruled Western Europe. The patriarch of Rothschild was assassinated. The patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai was seriously injured. In that era, a man named Monlier appeared in Western Europe. He was almost equivalent to Wang Tianzong in this era. However, he found a nearly perfect opportunity to completely break the situation that had lasted for a long time in Western Europe. In the end, he became the best and greatest pope of the Vatican in nearly 500 years. It was from that time that Rothschild, who had lost the Vatican, began to take another path. The Shadow Throne began to appear in Western Europe. During that period, in the most difficult time of the Wang family of Beihai and Rothschild, there was also a person named Zhou Xian. He came to Zhongzhou state from Switzerland. That was the beginning and origin of the Li family. From that period to more than 20 years ago, the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family played the leading roles in the world. This history was recorded in the history of the Wang family of Beihai, in the history of Rothschild, and in the history of the Vatican. It was extremely clear. The memory was vivid. Wang Tianzong was silent for a long time. After losing the Li family, did the Wang family of Beihai want to restabilize its relationship with Rothschild and finally set foot on the top of the world again? The scene seemed beautiful. Wang Tianzong had no aversion to Rothschild. But that was not what he wanted. It was really not. This is the only choice at present. The Shadow Throne is also willing to give up the present and gamble on the future. King Tong looked at Wang Tianzong and said seriously. The only choice was that he had no choice. Wang Tianzong hated having no choice the most. He had now stepped into a new realm with one foot, and his sword intent had reached an unprecedented peak. Maybe in the next second he might break through. After the breakthrough, he could choose whatever he wanted. But he still needed an opportunity. This opportunity could be the next second or it could be the rest of his life. Now he was only a paper-thin distance away from the invincible realm. This piece of paper had become very transparent, but it had unparalleled willfulness. If there was no suitable opportunity, he might not be able to break through this layer of paper in his lifetime. Tianzong. King Tong called him in a very gentle voice. Wang Tianzong reached out and patted her palm. He said with a smile, "Don't worry. In addition to the Shadow Throne, I have another candidate who is more suitable to break the situation. Wait a little longer." How is it possible? King Tong was a little incredulous. The person who takes action first is destined to lose and even lose everything. Who will take action for you at this time? Of course, it's a person who has the ability to take action, but he has nothing. Wang Tianzong said calmly. Chapter 467. Wang Tianzong was talking about tyrants. Today Eastern Europe was like a dark cloud hanging over the city. At the delicate moment when a storm was coming, there were at least 20 invincible realm experts gathered in Eastern Europe. 20 invincible realm experts. What did that mean? There were nearly 7 billion people in the world, and from the perspective of martial arts, the divine and holy lists represented the pinnacle of martial arts. 15 people on the divine list. There were 15 people on the holy roll. There were a total of 30 invincible realm experts. There were also a few who were not strong enough to be on the list. There were also people like Lin Fengting who hid their names. The total number of invincible realm experts in the world could not exceed 50. There were less than 50 invincible realm experts in a population of 7 billion. This number was much less than the number of heads of state in the world. In contrast, there were many half-step invincible realm experts who seemed to be only one step away from the real invincible realm. And there were many more thunder-shocking realm experts than half-step invincible realm experts. Fire-flaming realm experts who could be regarded as super elites anywhere, were the main force of martial arts. Further down, the ice-condensing realm and chi-controlling realm were as vast as the sea, the cornerstone of martial arts. But compared with billions of ordinary people, the so-called ice-condensing realm and chi-controlling realm elites were also rare. It was hard to cross the threshold of martial arts. It was difficult to climb the martial path. It was as difficult as ascending the heavens. This also showed how precious the experts of the invincible realm were. Any invincible realm expert, no matter whether he was on the divine list or the holy list or not qualified to be on the list, was a real big shot in the dark world. He was even a big shot who could protect a country. Now the chaos in Eastern Europe had gathered the world's superpowers. There were also invincible realm experts who belonged to various powerful countries. At least 20 invincible realm experts gathered together. What did that mean? How majestic was the decisive battle in Tiandu 3 years ago? Only a few invincible realm experts showed up. This meant that Eastern Europe had gradually evolved into a chaos that the Dark World had never seen in nearly 100 years. The general trend formed by such a chaotic situation was overwhelming. Ice condensing, chi controlling, fire flaming, and thunder shocking, they had no right to resist at all. They could only go with the flow in the general trend. The peak of the thunder-shocking realm and the half-step invincible realm could play a role. But in the deadlock, only an invincible realm expert could really break the deadlock. Now there was only one invincible realm expert in the entire Dark World. He had nothing. Perhaps in the future, Jiang Qiansong would also be included. But now there was only one. An expert on the divine list, the former leader of the Polar Ground Alliance, Tyrant. This condition was too difficult and the screening range was too small, so King Tong easily thought of this candidate. Tyrant? She asked. Yes. Wang Tianzong nodded. The indefinite grace I borrowed from you was prepared for Tyrant. King Tong thought for a moment and asked, Where is Tyrant? I'm still looking. I found some clues, so let's wait a little longer. Wang Tianzong said. He now had great hopes of breaking through, and he had Tyrant as an alternative to break the deadlock. Naturally, he did not want the Shadow Throne to fight desperately. Even if the Wang family of Beihai did not advance and retreat at the same time as Rothschild, their relationship was always close. Whenever there was a dispute in the Dark World, they were each other's best allies. If the Shadow Throne paid too much for the chaos in Eastern Europe, it would reduce the power of Wang Tianzong's side. King Tong frowned. There are many variables. She said, How can it be so easy to find an invincible realm expert hiding in the dark? And even if you find him, he may not be willing to work for you. There must be variables, but they are not as big as you think. Tyrant has nothing. If he is unwilling to quit, he can only take a risk. This will definitely be a big gamble. If the Wang family of Beihai fully supports him, what reason does he have to refuse? As for the position, the current tyrant has no position. King Tong thought carefully. With the prestige of the Sword Emperor in the Dark World and her own authority in the Shadow Throne, King Tong believed that if she insisted on breaking the deadlock, the possibility of the entire Shadow Throne agreeing to go crazy with the Wang family of Beihai was more than 80%. However, this kind of madness was only a choice made in desperation. Tyrant was indeed a good candidate. If he was willing to cooperate with the Wang family of Beihai, the Shadow Throne naturally did not want to pay any price. Where's Tyrant? King Tong asked. A few days ago he appeared in Snow Country. Our people were one step slower and lost him. Wang Tianzong shook his head. But don't worry. We will find him. King Tong said yes and wanted to say something more. Wang Tianzong's cell phone suddenly rang. There was only one word on the caller ID. Solstice. Wang Tianzong glanced at King Tong and did not speak. King Tong, who was full of solemnity, suddenly became resentful. I'll go downstairs to order. King Tong was silent for a moment, stood up and casually found an excuse to leave the suite. Wang Tianzong picked up the phone and said hello. Have you had dinner? On the other end of the phone, Summer Solstice's lazy and elegant voice sounded. It should be dawn in Wulan State now. Not yet. Wang Tianzong told the truth. King Tong went downstairs to order. Were you with King Tong last night? Summer Solstice's voice was soft. This question was not easy to answer. Because Wang Tianzong couldn't understand what this sentence meant. He and King Tong were in a suite. He stood on the balcony all night and King Tong slept in the bedroom all night. Were they together or not? Wang Tianzong looked out of the window. There was a luxurious and somewhat exaggerated floor-to-ceiling window in the living room of the suite. Looking through the window, the city was rainy and cold. It's raining in Reki City. Wang Tianzong changed the topic. Summer Solstice snorted softly. Wang Tianzong laughed. I watched the starry sky on the balcony all night and I didn't come in until it rained at dawn. Are you satisfied now? Summer Solstice giggled and joked. My Majesty is getting more and more appropriate. It's Madam who taught me well. Wang Tianzong said solemnly. At this moment, all the chaotic and swaying moods last night seemed to have completely disappeared. Wang Tianzong could only feel calmness in his heart. Eastern Europe. Is it beautiful? Summer Solstice suddenly asked. Wang Tianzong's hand holding the phone stiffened slightly for a moment. He said blandly, it's average and it's very cold. I'm not afraid of the cold. Summer Solstice's voice seemed to contain something else. Beihai is better. It's suitable for cultivation. Wang Tianzong said. Summer Solstice fell silent and did not speak for a long time. Wang Tianzong did not say anything. The silence was gentle and heavy. After a long time, Xia Ji said softly, at this time I should be by your side. As the hostess of the Wang family of Beihai, Summer Solstice rarely expressed her views on things outside Beihai. Most of the time she was like a precious vase carefully cared for by Wang Tianzong. She was just carefree in her own little world. Fox said. But being carefree wasn't stupid. At every critical moment, Summer Solstice would appear at the right time. She really didn't understand the overall situation of the Dark World, but someone did. As long as she wanted to listen, she could hear it at any time. Therefore, she understood the subtlety of the chaos in Eastern Europe very well. He also understood how tricky the situation Wang Tianzong was dealing with at this time was. It was no exaggeration to say that in such a chaotic situation, the Wang family of Beihai was the superpower that should be the most cautious. Because the Wang family of Beihai was the strongest, but it was not strong enough to sweep everything. Such a Wang family of Beihai would easily become the target of everyone. Once the Wang family of Beihai encountered a setback in Eastern Europe, as long as it was not a serious injury, given the current situation of Zhou State, there might not be many people at the top of Zhou State who would be indignant. The reason was also very simple. It was because the Wang family of Beihai was powerful. So Summer Solstice wanted to make a move. In the border war, she lost all her foundation. Even with the immortality potion, which had a heaven-defying effect, she still had not recovered. But the martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai was based on outbreak. If Summer Solstice broke out with all her strength, her combat capability in an instant would not be inferior to any expert at the peak of the invincible realm. Wang Tianzong, Lin Fengting, Li Guangtu and Summer Solstice. When the four of them learned swordsmanship together, summer solstice had the best talent. If there had been no battle more than 20 years ago, the Wang family of Beihai might have even had the first female chosen one in the history of the Dark World. This also meant that even if summer solstice's foundation had completely collapsed, she could completely break the deadlock in the shortest time with a short outbreak. This also meant that even if Xiaxi's foundation had completely collapsed, she could completely break the stalemate in the shortest time with a short burst of power. Arcis of the Vatican, deity of the purgatory, and Lin Fengting of the Lin clan, whom the Wang family of Beihai did not want to think about now. After summer solstice's sword, it was basically a situation where both sides suffered. What deadlock could not be broken? No need. Wang Tianzong's eyes were calm and firm. I can handle it. Actually, it's nothing. I also want to go to Eastern Europe. Tianzong, I suddenly feel that it's almost time. Summer solstice chuckled on the other end of the phone. Stop it. Wang Tianzong suddenly interrupted summer solstice. His voice was calm with a hint of anger. The entire Mount Dibbing knew that His Majesty doted on summer solstice and had never lost his temper. In summer solstice's impression, this seemed to be the first time that Wang Tianzong had interrupted her since she knew him. Maybe it was the second time? I can handle it here. Wang Tianzong held the cup in his hand. The heavy crystal cup slowly melted into pieces in his hand. The pieces slipped down along his fingertips and fell on the tea table. The water in the cup had completely turned into steam and melted in Wang Tianzong's hand. I can handle it, Wang Tianzong said again. Summer solstice was silent for a longer time. I'm sorry. After a long time she whispered, I'm not, I know. Wang Tianzong laughed. His voice was low, not gentle but strong as the sea. I can rest assured when you are at home. Not only because of the safety of you and Mount Dibbing, but also because I'm afraid that if you are not at home I will not find the way home. There was a deep breath in the silence on the other end of the phone. Wang Tianzong held the phone tightly and said slowly, the current situation is a bit tricky, but no one in the Dark World can touch me. Don't worry. In Eastern Europe, everything will have an explanation. There must be an explanation. I don't want any explanation. Summer solstice said softly. Wang Tianzong laughed. His smile was extremely bitter and looked extremely unwilling. I'm sorry. He whispered. There were too many meanings in this sentence. Perhaps everyone in the world could understand Sword Emperor's helplessness and difficulties. Everyone in the world also understood the responsibility and weight of the Wang family of Beihai. But in Wang Tianzong's view, the so-called helplessness was his own incompetence. He only had summer solstice as a woman in his life. She was amazing in martial arts and was even likely to become the first female chosen one in the history of the Dark World. She was his most cherished wife. She was his world. How important was that? But the most cherished woman in his life, who should have been the most dazzling woman in the Dark World, lived a life she didn't like before in Mount Dibbing because she lost her foundation. This kind of life had lasted for more than 20 years. More than 20 years. And the person who almost ruined summer solstice's life was still alive. There had to be an explanation for this matter. There had to be an explanation. Wang Tianzong could apologize to summer solstice because he carried a heavy burden. But some people, they didn't deserve to apologize. Wang Tianzong silently hung up the phone and looked at the rain outside the window. In the early morning of Reki City, there was a flash of thunder in the gloomy sky. The wind was getting stronger. The rain was majestic. Wang Tianzong looked at it silently. His eyes were indifferent, but with a kind of calmness and determination to the extreme. A soft knock on the door suddenly sounded. Wang Tianzong said casually, "Come in." Seeing no response from outside the door, he raised his eyebrows slightly, stood up and repeated in Chinese, "Come in." The door, which was not closed, was gently pushed open. There seemed to be a cloud in the suite. An old man with a sage-like appearance walked into the living room with a smile. He was dressed in a neat Daoist robe, holding a floating sink, and had white beard and white hair. Such a dress was not common even in Zhongzhou state, which had become more and more respectful of traditional culture in recent years. In Eastern Europe it was a complete anomaly. However, the feeling that the old man gave off was not abrupt. Instead, it was natural, and there was already a vague feeling of returning to one's true nature. Taoist welcome. Wang Tianzong chuckled and asked Xianxia to sit down. He personally poured him a glass of water and put a bag of tea provided by the hotel. The tea was made very casually, but it was already a great respect and politeness from Wang Tianzong. Only one Taoist priest in Zhongzhou state deserved this kind of respect. Metaphysics Grandmaster. Xianxia. Taoist travels all day long. Took me a lot of effort to find you. Why don't you consider taking a rest in Mount Dibing for a while? If there is a Taoist priest in Mount Dibing, I will feel more at ease. Wang Tianzong said softly. He did not understand metaphysics, but he understood metaphysics. Although the essence of metaphysics was not omniscient and omnipotent prediction, it was not a pure conspiracy. Xianxia was a person with real talent and learning. So was great Master Wei. Such a person might not be able to accurately predict anything without a huge push behind him, but at least he could know a general direction. This was the most real and rare part of metaphysics. The art of divination Zhou 5 elements and 8 diagrams. Metaphysics was really mysterious and illusory. Real metaphysics grandmasters had always been rarer than invincible realm experts. The Wang family of Beihai had a profound foundation and once had its own metaphysics grandmaster, but there was no one in this generation. But Wang Tianzong could also understand the benefits that a real metaphysics grandmaster could bring to the family. In his invitation was extremely sincere. This was not the first time he had invited Xianxia. However, Xianxia had never given a clear answer. Now his status was equivalent to that of a visiting official of the Wang family of Beihai, but he rarely went to Mount Dibing. The possibility of him staying in Mount Dibing was even smaller. I'm used to being idle. If I stay in one place for too long, I will feel uncomfortable. I'd better not stay in Mount Dibing. It's not difficult for your majesty to find me. I rarely leave Zhongzhou state. With the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai, it's easy to find someone in Zhongzhou state if you want to. Xianxia said with a warm smile. Wang Tianzong smiled, lowered his head and lit a cigarette. In the rising smoke, an inexplicable light flashed in Xianxuanzi's eyes. The chaos in Eastern Europe was in a stalemate. Xianxuanzi knew that Wang Tianzong would find him. Even if he didn't know, Qin Weibai would tell him that Wang Tianzong would find him since he was the 13th supermaster of Samsara Palace hidden in the dark. Therefore, Xianxuanzi appeared in front of the intelligence system of the Wang family of Beihai at a more suitable time, and then he was naturally taken to Eastern Europe. Xianxuanzi was a little confused. He could roughly know Wang Tianzong's purpose, but he couldn't figure out Qin Weibai's mind. Wang Tianzong invited Xianxuanzi. Qin Weibai knew this news, but she never gave him any orders. There was no need to deliberately mislead or hide anything. Her orders were only 4 words. Tell the truth. Tell the truth to Wang Tianzong? Xianxuanzi became more and more confused about Qin Weibai's meaning. He picked up the teacup, lowered his head and took a sip of tea. He said with a smile, Your Majesty, have you been confused recently? The situation in Eastern Europe is very tricky. Wang Tianzong said, Taoist priest, do you have any advice? The situation in Eastern Europe is the contemporary general trend. I can't see through it. Xianxuanzi looked at Wang Tianzong. His eyes were calm. Since he was telling the truth, he naturally had a clear conscience. Can't you see through it, Taoist priest? Wang Tianzong asked. No one can see through it. Since it is the contemporary general trend, there will inevitably be countless possibilities, and each possibility will have different causes and effects. I can't see through it and I dare not see it. Xianxuanzi said with a smile. Wang Tianzong nodded slowly and suddenly asked, What if Beihai moves first? Xianxuanzi was silent for a long time as if he was calculating. After a long time he shook his head. It's all possible. It meant that they might win or lose. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes and smoked a small half of the cigarette. I see that your Majesty's sword intent is extremely strong. If there is no accident, this should be the critical moment of your Majesty's martial arts in this life. In this case I have a suggestion. Xianxuanzi said slowly, It's better to stay still than to move. Between movement and silence, Wang Tianzong did not know how to choose, nor did he know if he could choose. That was the biggest confusion he had. Silence? He asked. Wait and see. Xianxuanzi nodded. Wang Tianzong turned his head and looked at the direction of the office of the president through the French window of the hotel. He could not see the office of the president from this height, but the bright red color of the star flag was still clear. Wang Tianzong looked at the flag in his sight and suddenly asked, Taoist priest, do you think I can break through and become the only chosen one in the dark world? There were not so many possibilities for this kind of thing, only yes or no. So this question was easy for Xianxia to answer. Breaking through is inevitable. Xianxia did not hesitate. He answered quickly, but when he thought about it carefully, this sentence was only half a sentence. Wang Tianzong turned his head and glanced at Xianxia. Xianxia looked at Wang Tianzong strangely, with some emotion and some pity. What is the chosen one in your majesty's mind? Xianxia suddenly asked. The chosen one is naturally an invincible person. Wang Tianzong answered without hesitation. This was his philosophy. The strongest person, the invincible person, was the chosen one. But in my opinion, the chosen one is actually perfect. Your dark world has divided martial arts into many levels, but when did your majesty hear that the chosen one is also a level? Before the invincible realm appeared, the first invincible realm was the chosen one. Before the thunder-shocking realm appeared, the first invincible realm was the chosen one. In a sense, Li Shuo, it's true that the invincible person is the chosen one, but it's not absolute. The chosen one is actually perfect. The right time, the right place, and the right people are all perfect. When countless seemingly accidental conditions gather on the strongest person, he will be the real chosen one. The chosen one is not a realm but a person. There is only one truly invincible person. Xianxia looked at Wang Tianzong with real pity in his eyes. Taoist, do you mean that I'm not perfect? Wang Tianzong asked. Your majesty is amazing enough. It's almost beyond the limit of human beings to reach this step and even continue to take half a step. It's a move against the natural order. The Wang family of Beihai has a deep foundation and strong fate. It also has the right time and the right place. Xianxia lowered his eyelids and told the truth. But Beihai is not stable. How can it be perfect when the right time, the right place, and the right people are all right? With your majesty's talent, you are destined to break through the last half step. But if you don't have enough fate, I don't know what kind of state it will be, because I have never seen the real chosen one. Wang Tianzong suddenly had nothing to say. He thought for a long time and asked slowly, Taoist, can you help me? Xianxia smiled and said calmly, this is something your majesty needs to make a choice. I can't help you. Choice? Choice. Wang Tianzong leaned forward slightly and put his hands on the table. He looked into Xianxuanzi's eyes and asked, what do I need to choose? Xianxuanzi sighed softly. He gently swung the horsetail whisk in his hand and it fell on Wang Tianzong's left hand. Your sword. He said slowly, this. He looked at his horsetail whisk and lowered his eyebrows. Wang Tianzong looked down at the horsetail whisk and his face suddenly became a little pale. Xianxuanzi's horsetail whisk fell on the ring finger of his left hand. He wore a ring on the ring finger. It was the wedding ring of him and summer solstice. Xianxuanzi looked at him with soft eyes. Your Majesty, there are too many things in your heart. It's better to let go. Wang Tianzong was in a daze. His sword guarded the Wang family of Beihai. His ring was his past with summer solstice. Was this the so-called choice? But he forgot one thing. Xianxuanzi was talking about his sword, this. There were no words before the two. It was not sword or this, nor sword and this. It was sword this. Wang Tianzong thought about his life silently and said in a dull tone, let go. Xianxuanzi did not speak. If I let go, what would all the things I've done in this life count for? Tranquil, forbearing, glorious, warm, invincible, all of the past, what did that count for? Like the autumn leaves. Wang Tianzong looked at his palm. If I let go, Xianxuanzi said quietly, nothing in the world. Divine Emperor of Nine Heavens. Chapter 468. On August 10th, it rained moderately in Linnan. The dense rain sprinkled all over the city, and the scenery of the whole West Lake became more and more charming. The lonely boat on the West Lake was still drifting aimlessly. The person on the boat was still fishing. This picture seemed to have become a part of the West Lake. Day and night, it seemed to be an eternal scenery. The person watching the scenery was still watching the scenery. The scenery was not boring. He was not tired of watching it either. The private room on the Mingyue Tower was still elegant. He sat in front of the window with a pale face, looking out, silent like a statue. The lonely boat in the center of the lake was far and near, near and far. Time passed slowly. The sky was still gloomy and the rain was getting heavier. He quietly looked at the lonely boat drifting with the wind and rain on the lake. The hazy scenery of the whole West Lake seemed to be far away from him. In his eyes, there was only the dark night on the lonely boat. The night was like a curtain, deep and obscure. A ray of light lit up in the almost extreme darkness. It was like the first ray of light that illuminated the world at dawn. His pupils contracted slightly and he narrowed his eyes and laughed. The whole elegant private room seemed to have merged with him. As his chuckles spread, the whole private room became extremely cold and empty. The phone suddenly rang. He casually took the phone on the table, glanced at it and answered it. A somewhat embarrassed face appeared on the screen of the phone, with some undisguised annoyance. He looked down at the phone screen and did not speak. "Your Majesty." The voice of the person on the other end of the phone was hoarse and he seemed to be a little embarrassed. "I didn't find Zhou Xian." On the other end of the phone was Mellad, the second commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican, and also the first follower of His Majesty. His Majesty looked at him quietly. "Why?" "I was entangled by the Master of Samsara Palace for a while. When I arrived at the address Your Majesty gave me, they should have entered the secret base of the Jiang family of South America. I looked around for a few days but I didn't find a suitable opportunity." The follower looked ashamed. He knew very well what an important position Zhou Xian played in His Majesty's plan. He was the second commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican, and he followed Holy Virgin Angel to Reiki City. Zhou Xian almost ran away under his nose, but he did not stop him. This was equivalent to directly destroying a very important chess piece of His Majesty. The disciple lowered his head and said in a low voice, "I'm useless." His Majesty nodded and said, "Oh. Are you sure you met the Master of Samsara Palace?" he asked. The follower hesitated slightly. Before he could speak, His Majesty had already said indifferently, "Don't think about it. If it was really the Master of Samsara Palace, you wouldn't have the chance to stand here and talk to me. It's my incompetence." The disciple repeated his words. His Majesty was silent for a while and looked at the lonely boat in the distance. After a long time he said calmly, "It doesn't matter. Since you can't get the chips of the Jiang family of South America, your task in the Vatican will be heavier. I will try my best to create an opportunity for you to control the Holy Disarmament Corps. Wait for my news." "Control the Holy Disarmament Corps?" The disciple was stunned for a moment. "What about Arsis?" He was the second commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps. And the commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps was Arsis. Among the few experts at the peak of the invincible realm in the Dark World, Arsis was not very powerful in his normal state. But after the coronation, Arsis was almost no weaker than anyone. He could be said to be the biggest deterrent force the Vatican had placed in Eastern Europe. As long as he was there, the follower could only be the second commander. "Nothing." His Majesty's tone was a little cold. "If he dies, you will naturally become the new commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps." The follower looked at His Majesty on the screen of the mobile phone, and there was a flash of fiery excitement in his eyes. "The matter of the Jiang family of South America can be put aside. Next, keep an eye on Angel," His Majesty said and hung up the phone directly. There was a knock on the door almost at the same time as the phone was hung up. A figure pushed the door open and walked in, calm and composed. "Secretary Wang, sit down." His Majesty smiled and reached out to invite Wang Qinglei, who was still staying in Lin, to sit down. He asked, "How many days before the meeting?" Wang Qinglei had been attending the high-profile Southeast Conference in Lin, and in recent days. Shortly after the end of the Yuzhou Conference, under Wang Qinglei's proposal, the high-level officials of Wuxia, Jianghuai, Xianxia, and Minnan provinces met frequently and finally decided to establish the Economic Circle of the Four Provinces, which was the Southeast Conference held in Lin, and today. There was no doubt that after the end of the Yuzhou Conference, the Southeast Group was dissatisfied with the Li family's comeback. Once the Economic Circle of the Four Provinces was established, the four provinces would be more closely connected. At that time, all the pressure would be on the Li family, which had just gained a foothold in Xianxia. "It will end tomorrow." Wang Qinglei poured himself a cup of tea and said casually. His Majesty said thoughtfully, "What can I do for you?" Wang Qinglei asked directly, "You and I have special identities. If there are no special circumstances, I think it's better to meet less, especially in such a sensitive situation. Of course. His Majesty chuckled. You and I have been friends for nearly 10 years. You should know me. If it's not important, I won't meet you rashly. Wang Qinglei twitched the corner of his mouth and smiled. His Majesty took out a large but old file bag from his side. He handed the file bag to Wang Qinglei and said softly, I hope this thing can appear in front of Xianming as soon as possible. What do you mean? Wang Qinglei frowned subconsciously. He knew this thing. If he was right, it should be an X-ray film of some years. Wang Qinglei didn't know what it meant to appear in front of the person in charge of intelligence of the Wang family of Beihai. Eastern Europe has now entered a stalemate again. I think His Majesty the Sword Emperor is also in a dilemma. But the stalemate is not good for anyone. My thing may help the Sword Emperor make up his mind. His Majesty said with a smile. Wang Qinglei took the X-ray film in his hand, raised his eyes and said, May I have a look? Do you? His Majesty's tone was calm. Wang Qinglei took out the X-ray film and looked at it for a long time. The light in the room was a little dim and he didn't know martial arts or medicine, so he couldn't see what this X-ray film meant at all. I don't understand. Wang Qinglei looked at His Majesty and said. You don't need to understand. Wang Tianzong will understand. His Majesty said in a calm tone. Wang Qinglei took a deep look at him, put the X-ray film back into the bag and said slowly, You have been paying attention to Eastern Europe but you don't go there. If your plan can be implemented, what will be the final result of the chaos in Eastern Europe? There was silence in the box. His Majesty didn't seem to know how to answer. After a long time he said calmly, This is a big problem. What will happen to Tianzong? Wang Qinglei straightforwardly asked the question he was most concerned about. His Majesty gave him a strange look, thought for a moment and said, It depends on the final result. If Li Tianlong dies, he dies. If Li Tianlong lives, he lives. Wang Qinglei looked at His Majesty quietly, waiting for his explanation. Li Tianlong is very strong. If he eventually grows up, I can't think of any other candidate who can balance him except Wang Tianzong. But everything has its priority. At least in the chaos in Eastern Europe, my main goal is Qin Weibai. Only when she dies can I be free. After Qin Weibai, it's Li Tianlong's turn. If Li Tianlong dies, it's the best thing. But if he can live, I can only put this matter aside. If Li Tianlong lives, his rise will be unstoppable, so Wang Tianzong must also live. Wang Qinglei narrowed his eyes and digested the information His Majesty had said. If Li Tianlong grows up, even you are no match for him? No. His Majesty said calmly, My state is similar to his, but it's completely different. But he goes faster than me. In the end, it's hard for me to be his match. What about Tianzong? Wang Qinglei asked. He will break through. At present, the chaos in Eastern Europe is the only opportunity for him to break through. But even if he breaks through, he is not absolutely invincible. At least the Samsara Palace has the power to balance Wang Tianzong. So the best result is that Qin Weibai, Li Tianlong and Wang Tianzong all die. If this becomes a reality, the whole world will be our country. Qin Weibai is indeed very important. Wang Qinglei nodded thoughtfully. But I remember you once said that you didn't seem to have won the game with her. That's not the point. His Majesty said lightly, Life is like a game of chess, but it's not a real chess game. A temporary victory or defeat is not important. What matters is that I have to win in the most critical game. She is in the light and I am in the dark. I know almost all her chess pieces, but she doesn't know who I am. I can even push Wang Tianzong to break the deadlock in Eastern Europe. Does Qin Weibai want to win? Wang Qinglei didn't speak. He just slowly tapped his fingers on the file bag in front of him with X-rays. Secretary Wang, please. His Majesty turned to look at him and his voice was very sincere. Wang Qinglei smiled and said, Before tonight this thing will appear in front of Xianming, and before tomorrow morning, it will arrive in Eastern Europe. He stood up with the file bag. Good. His Majesty nodded and picked up the teacup in front of him. Wang Qinglei glanced at him and left the private room without a word. His Majesty quietly sipped the tea and looked at the lake in the distance. On the lake in the distance, the lonely boat gradually drifted over with a dark and pure sword intent. The wisps of light in the darkness had begun to disappear, and it became quiet again. His Majesty looked down at his watch. It was close to noon. He picked up the menu and began to order. Lunch was not simple. It was so sumptuous that it could almost be called a dinner party. The entire kitchen of Mingyue Tower began to become busy with His Majesty's order. His Majesty took out a bottle of fine Huadiao wine from the corner and prepared 2 wine glasses. After everything was done, he looked at his watch again. There was a knock on the door quietly. The person outside the door did not push the door open and waited quietly. His Majesty smiled, got up and took the initiative to open the door. An old man who was neatly dressed but a little hunched, stood outside the door of the box. He looked at His Majesty's face with a strange look in his eyes. His Majesty looked at him and said with a chuckle, "Boss Li, you're here. How wonderful." In the whole dark world there was only one person who deserved His Majesty to call Senior Li, Li Honghe. "You're welcome." Li Honghe shook his head and walked into the box. The kitchen had begun to serve. Delicious dishes with good color, smell and taste were served one after another. His Majesty opened the bottle of Huadiao wine. The fragrance of wine filled the air. Li Honghe quietly looked at His Majesty, who was very active, and suddenly said, "I don't know you. Who are you? Why did you ask me to come here?" The 3 questions were straightforward and to the point. His Majesty smiled. Outside the window, the gloomy light sprinkled in and shone on his face. It was a somewhat stiff but extremely ordinary face. "I've admired Senior Li for a long time. I propose a toast to you." His Majesty's voice was calm and he picked up the wine glass. Li Honghe looked down at the wine in the glass, picked it up and drank it up. His Majesty drank the wine in the glass without hesitation and looked at Li Honghe. His smile was strong but his eyes were a little cold. "Good wine." Li Honghe put down the glass and poured another glass. "The wine with glazed stars and blue flowers is of course good wine." His Majesty said with a chuckle. There were many kinds of poisons in this world. Some were very toxic. Some of them were extremely toxic. Glazed stars and blue flowers were completely out of the category of highly toxic. They were really deadly poisons. The combination of the 2 could easily kill anyone. Li Honghe glanced at him. "Are you afraid?" His Majesty's eyes were cold. "I had a brother. His name is Yu Donglai." Li Honghe said quietly. "I know, the famous poison doctor. But he's not with you. How can he save you?" His Majesty sneered. "Don't get me wrong. Poison Doctor is my brother and I naturally have the ability to distinguish poisons. If this glass of wine is really poisoned, I won't drink it. And how precious are glazed stars and blue flowers. They are all legendary things. How can you waste them on me, a dying man who is no longer in the invincible realm?" His expression was calm and composed without the slightest change. His Majesty looked at Li Honghe coldly. After a long time he suddenly laughed. "The serene blue flower and the glazed star are indeed legendary things. Elder Li is really experienced and knowledgeable. Let alone using these things to poison Elder Li, I haven't even seen these things before." Li Honghe's face remained unchanged, as calm as still water. "I wonder if Senior Li can show me the legendary deadly poisons?" His Majesty suddenly said. "Blue flowers and glazed stars. I haven't heard of these things in recent years. I'm afraid they are extinct. How can I have them?" "I'm afraid I'll disappoint you." Li Honghe said. "I'm not disappointed." His Majesty said with a smile. "No matter how deadly the blue flowers and glazed stars are, they are dead things after all. But I heard that the Li family raised a bird in those days. What I want to see today is actually that bird, Senior Li." Li Honghe said expressionlessly. "I don't know what you're talking about. Glazed stars are extremely hot. They generally live in volcanic environments. They can be called peerless fire poison. Blue flowers are extremely cold. They come from glaciers and are extremely insidious. I heard that back then the Li family collected 2 kinds of strange poisons for the poison doctor. In order to fuse them together, you used countless resources to cultivate a bird with a special biological structure. The bird was named Linnet, and it could perfectly fuse the poison of extreme heat and the poison of extreme cold." His Majesty looked at Li Honghe softly and said, "Senior Li, what I want is that bird." Li Honghe lowered his head to eat and said lightly, "I don't know what you're talking about. Why are you so stingy, Senior Li? I don't want that bird for nothing. I believe the reward can also satisfy you." His Majesty said with a sincere smile. Li Honghe glanced at him. "What can you give me?" His Majesty's eyes flashed and he said, "I can, swish." As soon as he opened his mouth and his voice came out, Li Honghe suddenly raised his palm. The fine wine in the glass rose in the air as if it was slashed in the face, sharp as a sword. Li Honghe pounced on the mysterious majesty without hesitation and grabbed his face directly with one hand. Chapter 469. There was a sudden change. Everything happened so suddenly that no one was prepared for it at all. His Majesty's voice was still echoing in the air. The sharp sword-like wine and Li Honghe's palm had already arrived in front of His Majesty. His Majesty narrowed his eyes and took a step back. Without any time to think, he directly punched Li Honghe's palm. Bang! There was a muffled sound in the private room. The sword intent collided with the power. The wine mixed with sword intent swept through the entire private room, looking extremely dazzling. Li Honghe's body shook slightly and his face turned pale. The wine that was splashed by him seemed to be endless. Countless water droplets flew in all directions and bounced off the walls. The entire private room was filled with shining sword light in an instant. His Majesty snorted and waved his fist again. It was midsummer, but the temperature in the entire private room suddenly became cold. The gradually louder sound of the rain, the noise of the West Lake tourists and the music of the bright moon tower. Everything disappeared completely. The water droplets shining with sword energy began to dim. Everything around him became cold and empty in silence. All that was left in Li Honghe's sight was the simple punch. The slow but powerful punch seemed to overturn the whole West Lake. His Majesty took a step forward. His face was expressionless, but his entire body exuded an almost invincible aura. Li Honghe was familiar with this feeling. This was the momentum that belonged to the peak of the invincible realm, majestic and vast. The water droplets shining with sword light gathered wildly and rushed toward His Majesty's fist. The iron fist collided with the sword light for a moment. The sword light completely scattered, and light began to appear in the cold and dark private room. Li Honghe's body jerked back a few steps under the tremendous force. His Majesty, who was high above, flew directly up and hit the wall. A mouthful of blood completely dyed the wall red. He frowned slightly and looked at Li Honghe, his eyes cold and indifferent. Li Honghe looked thoughtfully at His Majesty, who fell to the ground in an extremely embarrassing manner. Li Honghe had now fallen from the invincible realm. His real strength was probably equivalent to that of a half-step invincible realm expert, and it was declining every day. His Majesty's realm was extremely high, but his combat capability was incredibly weak. Seriously speaking, the power he exerted was only equivalent to that of the peak of the thundershocking realm. This was enough to explain a lot of things. "Take off your mask." Li Honghe looked at His Majesty in front of him and said in a flat tone. His mask could almost be mistaken for the real thing. But the muscles on his face were extremely stiff. After careful observation, Li Honghe could easily confirm that the other party was talking to him with a mask. "You think you've got me?" His Majesty slowly stood up from the ground, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and sneered. "You're in a special state. Do you dare to go all out?" Li Honghe said indifferently, "Your current state is somewhat similar to my grandson's." "Your grandson?" His Majesty sneered. Li Honghe looked into his eyes and said calmly, "Who on earth are you?" The other party's state was very special. To some extent it was similar to Li Tianlan's but also completely opposite. Li Tianlan's body was perfect, but his realm was not enough for the time being. The other party had a realm, but his body was extremely fragile. In a flash, Li Honghe could completely determine the other party's state. This so-called His Majesty had been seriously injured for an unknown period of time. Although his martial arts foundation had not been destroyed, it was already on the verge of collapse, which also led to a great reduction in the power of his attack. Otherwise, with the momentum shown by the other party, once his injury was healed, Li Honghe thought that even at his peak, it would be difficult for him to win against him. "Does it matter who I am?" His Majesty walked back to the table and sat down. The two fought in a flash. Although the sword energy and power did not overflow out of the window, the whole box was already in a mess. Of course, the dishes could not be eaten, but the wine could still be drunk. His Majesty poured himself a glass of wine, drank it up and said calmly, "You must agree to my conditions." Li Honghe ignored his words and just asked, "Does it matter whether your life is important or not?" The meaning of this sentence was obvious. It was a naked threat. If you don't tell me who you are, I'll kill you. If you force your hand, you will also die. His Majesty's voice became colder and colder. It's worth it. I don't have much time left. Your existence makes me uneasy. Why can't I take you with me? Li Honghe smiled. This meeting had been a little inexplicable. Li Honghe felt that something was wrong when he saw the so-called Majesty. It was a feeling that something was becoming out of control. Li Honghe didn't like this feeling. Although he was smiling, the killing intent in his eyes had gradually become obvious. A crippled life could eliminate a great threat. Was there anything more worthwhile than this? Indeed. His Majesty was silent for a while and chuckled. You and I can go together. I heard that Senior Li left a few men of sacrifice after the collapse of the Li family. They used the code names of the Big Dipper. Now they are all exposed. Why not? I've seen the cemetery of the Southeast Procuratorate. It's really amazing. But how many of those tombstones are empty graves? Why not check it? Why not investigate the relationship between the Purgatory of Heaven capital and Senior Li? Oh, by the way, and Li Tianlan, his parents. Enough. Li Honghe suddenly said. His voice was extremely stable, but his eyes became extremely deep. His Majesty turned to look at him and still made the same request. I want cardinals. At least I need 5 drops of cardinal's blood. Cardinal's blood was the most poisonous, the most cold, and the most hot. His Majesty stayed in Lin, and for so long for these drops of cardinal's blood. Li Honghe stared at His Majesty in front of him. He couldn't figure out what went wrong. The man opposite him seemed to know too much. You know the Li family very well. He said slowly. Not bad. His Majesty's smile was gentle. But you know these things, but you don't say it. Can I understand that it's also in your interest to keep these things hidden? Li Honghe asked seriously. I don't deny that, but I know a lot of secrets. Exposing the Li family's secrets will have an impact on my whole plan. But you have to believe one thing. These effects are definitely not as important to me as cardinals. Li Honghe looked at him as if to determine whether his words were true or not. Who are you going to kill with cardinal's blood? Li Honghe asked. It can help me recover from my injury, but it's not for killing. His Majesty said slowly. Li Honghe was silent. Obviously, His Majesty had a realm but no strength because of his injury. If he could recover from his injury, he would do it at all costs. I can also say a lot of things about the Li family. These can be secrets or they can be made public. The difference is those drops of cardinal's blood. His Majesty said again. You know the Li family very well. Li Honghe repeated it again. It's often your enemy who knows you best, isn't it? His Majesty looked at Li Honghe and said with a smile. Enemy? Li Honghe raised his eyebrows. The Li family owes me. His Majesty took out another big bag from the corner of the box and threw it to Li Honghe. This was what he had just given Wang Qinglei. They were all X-rays. One would appear in front of Wang Tianzong tomorrow at the latest. And the other one was now given to Li Honghe by him. The 2 X-rays were exactly the same. Li Honghe knew poison doctor, so he knew medicine. Because of this, when he saw the hologram, his expression changed drastically. Chapter 470. It was still raining in Eastern Europe. The rain, which had lasted for several days and nights, raged through the whole city with the wind. The rain was overwhelming, messy, dense and blank and desolate. There was no clear change of seasons in Eastern Europe. The cool summer had passed, the rainy season was over, and the whole of Eastern Europe was about to enter the cold winter. Therefore, the atmosphere of the whole Wulan state seemed to become depressed and cold with the cold wind and rain. The great change of the Rekvia family directly tilted the position of the whole Wulan state to Zhongzhou state unconditionally. For several days, Prime Minister Riker, who was temporarily the president of Wulan state, had issued rigorous, sincere and apologetic apologies to Zhongzhou state, and severely condemned the despicable and insidious Jiang family of South America. All the statements were distributed through the diplomatic department of Wulan state. They not only resounded throughout the country but also announced to the world. With Wulan state's clear statement, Oga state and Ross state also announced that the previous dispute was all a misunderstanding. The 2 countries were willing to take full responsibility for the dispute and give Zhongzhou state adequate compensation. For a while, it seemed that the apology of the 3 Eastern European countries was echoing all over the world. The international image of Xianxia state was completely reversed in the fastest time. When people around the world believed that Xianxia state was innocent, the world's major powers, which had exerted great pressure on Xianxia state at the United Nations meeting and even made clear threats, all kept silent awkwardly. Every powerful country knew what the truth was, and they could see the humiliation of Wulan state, Oga state and Ross state from the statements. But in the game at the national level, the truth was often the least valuable thing. Only the outcome could determine everything. Xianxia state won, so it naturally had the qualification to write the facts. Snow Country, the only hegemon country in Eastern Europe, once asked Xianxia state to withdraw from Eastern Europe at the United Nations meeting. Otherwise, it would bring war to Xianxia state was the most embarrassed. On the first day of Wulan state's apology statement, the president of Snow Country, who was known for his toughness in the world, had called Xianxia state and expressed his intention to visit Xianxia state in the near future through the embassy. It was clear that he wanted to apologize. After all, the chaos in Eastern Europe happened in Eastern Europe. As the hegemon of Eastern Europe, Snow Country had to consider the attitude of Xianxia state, the hegemon of the world, when it could not expel Xianxia state from Eastern Europe. Although other countries were not as obvious as Snow Country, they also expressed their apologies to Xianxia state through different channels. The specific way in which these apologies were presented was for the benefit of the country. The change in Wulan state caused by Li Tianlan continued to set off aftershocks in an awkward and weird atmosphere. However, the major forces in the Dark World had reacted as soon as possible and poured into Wulan state. On August 8, the chairman of the board of directors of the American Hero International Group came to Eastern Europe to inspect the investment environment in Eastern Europe and determine the investment direction in the shortest time. The Hero Group believed that with Wulan state as the center, the nearby 5 countries, including Oga state and Ross, were the most valuable places for investment. The Hero Group dominated America and was the absolute giant in the whole of America. In the Dark World, the Hero Group had another name: American Heroes Guild. The chairman of the board of directors of the Hero Group was the president of the Heroes Club, who was ranked on the Divine List and was very close to the peak of the Invincible Realm. With the Heroes Club's statement on the morning of August 9, the Eastern Church, the largest religious organization in Eastern Europe, issued a statement at the same time. Patriarch Calendar, one of the 4 patriarchs of the Eastern Church, was about to visit Wulan state and bring the glory of God to this war-torn country. On the night of August 9, Kasrotter, the god of war of Star State, officially issued a statement that the terrorist Pluto, who had been wanted by Star State for nearly 10 years and had caused great losses to Star State, had sneaked into Wulan state. Kasrotter hoped that Wulan state could provide convenience. The men in black would immediately enter Wulan state, and at the same time, they would do their best to protect the stability of Wulan state and stop terrorist activities. At the same moment, Fantasy World, a superpower in North America, responded to Kasrotter's call and expressed its willingness to cooperate with the men in black's actions in Wulan state. On the morning of August 10, Arsis, the commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican, came to Recce City. The Holy Disarmament Corps and the Holy Punishment Priest Group were mighty. Angel, the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, who had been walking with the Snowdance Corps, left the Snowdance Corps and re-entered the Vatican's team. On the same night, the Holy Disarmament Corps, known as the strongest combat force of the Vatican, was attacked. Black Knight, the leader of the Dark Knights of Northern Europe, personally took action and killed 15 Holy Disarmament warriors. He left before Arsis could take action and escaped unscathed. After several superpowers, more and more small and medium-sized organizations in the Dark World began to enter Recce City. On August 11, in Recce City there was a storm, lightning flashing and thunder rumbling. The sky seemed to be always gloomy, and the humidity in the air was constantly increasing. The rainy season in Wulan state had passed halfway, and the gradually cold air swept over from the polar region in the distance. Even in Recce City, which was not affected by the polar sun and the polar night, the day seemed to be dyed with a layer of twilight. The whole city looked cold and restless in the surging undercurrent. In just a few days, the whole Recce City was in a turbulent situation. The major forces frequently made appointments with the high-level officials of Wulan state and influential figures of authority in an almost ostentatious manner. All their actions seemed to be undisguised. The Snowdance Corps had been silent. The reason was simple. Since the battle on August 7, Li Tianlong had been in a coma. It was normal for him to be in a coma after being seriously injured. But Li Tianlong was in a coma at the wrong time. Zhou State had taken down Wulan State, but Li Tianlong did not have time to suppress all the variables, which was tantamount to giving other superpowers a chance. Although the chance was very small. Although Zhou State had an absolute advantage. But if they entered Wulan State at this time, there was still a possibility of turning the situation around. Wulan State was too important. This was the most important place in the whole of Europe that military experts had to fight for. Controlling this place was tantamount to controlling an important lifeline of Eastern and Western Europe. The benefits it meant could completely support the rapid rise of a superpowerful family. No one was willing to give up this place. Now that there was a chance, almost everyone flocked to it. Most importantly, the Shadow Throne was also moving. The intelligence of the Dark World had always been extremely timely. Everyone knew that the elites of the Shadow Throne had begun to enter Reki City. The Shadow Throne had never concealed this news. Similarly, everyone knew that the Shadow Throne was cooperating with the Wang family of Beihai. The Snowdance Corps now represented Zhou State in Eastern Europe. But who dared to say that the Wang family of Beihai could not represent Zhou State? Who dared to say that the Sword Emperor of Zhou State could not represent the Wang family of Beihai? As a close ally of the Wang family of Beihai, the Shadow Throne was moving, which at least showed that the Shadow Throne had never given up Wulan State. It also showed that the Sword Emperor was not satisfied with the fact that the Snowdance Corps dominated Wulan State. The Sword Emperor and Zhou State wanted Wulan State. But the Sword Emperor did not like the Snowdance Corps to get Wulan State. Once some of these grievances were deeply thought about, it was enough for all the superpowers to find countless opportunities. Although the Sword Emperor was powerful before the dust settled, who would think that they would lose? Just like the failure of the Jiang family of South America, 3 invincible realm experts and nearly 1,000 elites were killed by Li Tianlong out of the feast in Eastern Europe. The example of the weak defeating the strong happened every year in the Dark World. Therefore, when Li Tianlong was still in a coma and Wang Tianzong was silent, all the superpowers were trying their best to establish their own foundation in Reki City. Wang Tianzong seemed to have seen it, but he seemed not to have seen it. He had never expressed any opinion about it, nor had he targeted any force. No one knew what Wang Tianzong was thinking. As the superpowers entered Wulan State one after another, although the current situation in Wulan State was stable, the actions of the superpowers gradually brought some variables to the stable situation. Although it was impossible for the superpowers to completely destroy everything that Zhou State had in Wulan State in the shortest time, in the long run, it would make people uncomfortable. Moreover, the superpowers that could dominate the Dark World had countless resources behind them. If they were allowed to go on like this, who knew what they would do? More and more doubts began to gather inside the high-level officials of Zhou State. At noon on August 12th, when General Anderson, the Minister of Defense of Reki City, was assassinated in his office, the news came out and Zhou State finally turned its inner doubts into substantive actions. President Li Huaqing of Zhou State personally held a video conference with Wang Tianzong. Li Huaqing was alone. Wang Tianzong was also alone. Separated by a screen, the 2 men who had reached the peak in their respective fields were unusually silent. "What's the matter?" Wang Tianzong glanced at Li Huaqing and asked calmly. His tone was flat, but Li Huaqing was keenly aware that there was an extremely bad emotion brewing in Wang Tianzong's eyes. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and said blandly, "How much do you know about the situation in Reki City?" "I don't." Wang Tianzong responded straightforwardly. His tone was tough. "I've been in a bad mood these days. Has the situation changed?" There seemed to be a rage brewing in Li Huaqing's heart, but it was hidden. In the history of Zhou State in recent decades, he was indeed not a very strong president, but this did not mean that he was incompetent. He was the president of Zhou State. Who in Zhou State would be so casual when they saw him? Wang Tianzong. Only Wang Tianzong. The current situation hasn't changed much. Li Huaqing slowed down his tone. But if you keep silent, it's not necessarily the case. The Shadow Throne has entered Reki City. You know what that means? What does it mean? Wang Tianzong asked. He was sitting in the living room of the hotel. It was raining outside the window and the sky was gloomy. There was no light in the living room. The dim light fell on him and he looked a little gloomy. "Your cooperation with Rothschild is not a secret," The Shadow Throne entered Wulan City in a high-profile manner, which is tantamount to announcing to the world that you don't support Marshal Li Tianlan's action in Wulan State. This is almost a public announcement of your disagreement with Tianlan. That's why the superpowers are so rampant after entering Reki City. Don't you understand this? Li Huaqing's face was serious and dignified. His question was extremely powerful, with heavy pressure shaking the entire call screen. Wang Tianzong glanced at him. I don't get along with Li Tianlan. Are you comparing him with me? What makes him? Li Huaqing became completely serious and said, he is now the Marshal of Zhongzhou State's Snowdance Corps. From this position, only he has public office and can represent Zhongzhou State in Eastern Europe. Why can't he compare with you? Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and nodded. It makes sense. But there are some things that don't need to be publicized. Even if I do something, the whole dark world knows that Li Tianlan and I do not get along. Li Huaqing frowned. At this time, you and Tianlan are both in Zhongzhou State, surrounded by enemies. Our internal conflicts can be solved by ourselves behind closed doors. We are outside, but we can't unite against foreign enemies. Tianzong, isn't this a joke? Li Huaqing said in a deep voice. Wang Tianzong was indifferent and said blandly, tell me about your arrangement. On behalf of Zhongzhou State, I now formally ask you to let the Shadow Throne leave Reki City immediately. This is the only requirement. Li Huaqing said in a deep voice. The Shadow Throne's high-profile entry into Reki City had caused a scene of demons dancing in Reki City. If the Shadow Throne left Reki City, it also meant that Wang Tianzong did not welcome the Shadow Throne. It was already very polite to send them out in advance. If the people who stayed here did not leave, they were likely to face the sword edge of Listen to the Sea. When the news came out, Li Huaqing had every reason to believe that most of the forces gathered in Wulan State at this time would leave in disgrace. Even if the remaining forces were superpowers, they would not dare to act in the open. Wang Tianzong said, let's talk about it later. Comrade Wang Tianzong, I'm not discussing with you. This is an order. Beihai is a part of Zhongzhou State. I am the president of Zhongzhou State. At the critical moment I can order Beihai and you. Wulan State must return to stability. This is related to the interests of the entire Zhongzhou State in Eastern Europe. It is not a battlefield for you to settle your grievances. If Wulan State is lost, how will you come back? How did you get back? Wang Tianzong looked at Li Huaqing quietly. Li Huaqing's voice was very loud, piercing through the screen and causing a buzz. When all the voices stopped, Wang Tianzong said faintly, are you done? Don't you have anything to say? Li Huaqing's tone was cold. You're too noisy. Wang Tianzong said and hung up the communication directly. He stood up and looked out the window. The rain outside the window was messy and violent. The wind and rain howled as if there was no end to it. Wang Tianzong's eyes were calm and focused, and he looked extremely focused. If I let go, everything in the world will be gone, he muttered to himself, took a deep breath and finally shook his head. There was a knock on the door. The door was pushed open. King Tong, who looked dignified and noble in a splendid dress, came in. She happened to see Wang Tianzong shaking his head slightly. She was stunned and asked subconsciously, what's wrong? Nothing. Wang Tianzong suddenly asked, how many people from the Shadow Throne have arrived? King Tong felt a little strange, but she still told the truth. There are 20 experts above the Thundershocking realm, 2 of whom are in the half-step invincible realm and 6 at the peak of the Thundershocking realm. The fire-flaming realm troops are still being mobilized. At present there are more than 100 people. Wang Tianzong glanced at King Tong. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, the role of experts at the peak of the Thundershocking realm and even a half-step invincible realm was infinitely reduced. But Eastern Europe gathered the general trend of the entire dark world. This was the battlefield of the invincible realm, the battlefield of the invincible realm on the divine list, and the battlefield of the peak of the invincible realm. It was even the battlefield of the chosen one. But how could the dark world have a general trend at any time? Under normal circumstances, experts at the peak of the Thundershocking realm were already the power that could decide most of the situations in the dark world. There were not many such people in any force. The Shadow Throne had mobilized so many people in such a short time. If they were the first to break the situation, the price that King Tong was going to pay for her comeback this time was indeed great. What's your plan? King Tong raised her eyebrows and asked. I'm thinking that the elites of the Shadow Throne might go to the office of the president. Wang Tianzong said thoughtfully. King Tong's enchanting body shook. She looked up at Wang Tianzong and asked, "Are you crazy?" Wang Tianzong didn't say anything. King Tong's face was cloudy and uncertain. Finally, she couldn't help but ask, "Why?" The Shadow Throne entered Reki City in a strong and high-profile manner, so it attracted all the superpowers. Now the Shadow Throne was going to the office of the president. The first batch of more than 600 elites of the Snowdance Corps was stationed in the office of the president. The second batch of 2,000 elites was stationed near the office of the president. Li Tianlan was in a coma in the office of the president. The Shadow Throne going to the office of the president stimulated not only the nerves of the Snowdance Corps but also the nerves of Zhou State. Wang Tianzong didn't say anything. "What on earth do you want?" King Tong stared at Wang Tianzong's side face. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and said slowly, "Pressure." "Pressure? Only enough pressure can make me break through. I want the situation to be completely out of control and bring me enough pressure. Maybe that's the opportunity for me to break through." Wang Tianzong said softly. "If..." King Tong hesitated for a moment and finally couldn't help asking, "What if you don't succeed?" Once the situation was completely out of control and Wang Tianzong didn't succeed in breaking through, it would mean that Zhou State would lose Wulan State and even the Arctic Ocean Command. The foundation of Zhou State in Eastern Europe for more than 20 years would be completely destroyed, and the experts of Zhou State would suffer heavy casualties. King Tong didn't dare to think about what the crime was. "Then let go." Wang Tianzong laughed. His smile was very relaxed, but King Tong clearly felt that something heavy was slowly emerging in his eyes, which almost suffocated her. "Let go? Let go of what?" "Actually, it's nothing. The current situation in Eastern Europe is a deadlock for me, but isn't it the same for other forces? It's just that I have a lot of choices. But at this point, Zhou State is the only winner. For those forces, if they want to break the deadlock, they have to break the interests of Zhou State. They have only one choice, and when they make this choice they have to defeat me. So I simply make the situation completely chaotic." Wang Tianzong said with a smile, "If the situation is out of control, people in the world will attack Zhou State together. If the situation is not out of control, people in the world will attack the Wang family of Beihai together. If you were me, what would you choose? Do you want Zhou State to bear the pressure with the Wang family of Beihai?" King Tong asked. "I'm the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai," Wang Tianzong said, "and I don't want Zhou State to bear the pressure with me. It's just that I don't want to be divided with Zhou State first. Zhou State should stand with me and face the attack of the Dark World at the same time. Li Tianlan did take down Wulan State, but so what? The most important thing is to get it and keep it." As soon as King Tong spoke, there was a sudden knock on the door. It was extremely urgent. Wang Tianzong glanced at the door and said calmly, "Come in." A figure that surprised him appeared at the door. He was the head of intelligence of the Wang family of Beihai, Xianming. The surprise in Wang Tianzong's eyes flashed away. "What's the matter?" Xianming's expression was solemn, but there was no inconceivable fear. He had seen the same thing twice. For him it was not strange, no matter how strange it was. He held a big bag in his hand and said solemnly, "Your Majesty, there is something here. You may want to have a look." Wang Tianzong nodded. "Give it to me." Xianming handed over the bag in his hand. Wang Tianzong opened the bag and pulled out an X-ray from it. "I've verified the X-ray. It's not forged. It's absolutely real." Xianming took a deep breath. "This thing suddenly appeared on my desk and I don't know its origin." Wang Tianzong did not speak. He had been completely attracted by the contents of the X-ray. The X-ray was just a part of a person's body. It looked like a chest. But it didn't matter. What was important was the dense, star-like scratches that were illuminated by the light film. How familiar was this scene? Wang Tianzong looked at this scene quietly and his eyes became a little dazed. He had seen the X-ray of Qin Weibai when she was a child. The dense sword marks in it represented a similar but different sword stroke, including all phenomena. They kept spreading, crazily destroying Qin Weibai's human body functions. On this X-ray there was also a sword stroke. This sword stroke was completely different from the one Wang Tianzong had seen before. The one he had seen before was the 6 paths of reincarnation. It was all-encompassing. But now this sword stroke was absolutely condensed. All the sword chi gathered from all directions, bringing with it an unparalleled penetrative power as it charged straight for the opponent's heart. This sword stroke was the 24 moves of sword break of reincarnation. And this sword stroke was somewhat similar to the one he had seen before. There were 2 sword strokes. Looking at the distribution of the sword energy, it could hurt people without killing them. This was a sword stroke that no one could do. This kind of precise control could not be shown by any martial arts realm at present. The peak of the invincible realm could not be shown. The half-step chosen one could not do it. After Wang Tianzong broke through, he couldn't do it. The 2 sword strokes seemed to be from the hands of ghosts and gods. Wang Tianzong knew the 6 paths of reincarnation. He could be sure that no one in the Wang family of Beihai could do that. That sword stroke fell on Qin Weibai. The murderer definitely did not belong to the Wang family of Beihai. But what did this sword stroke mean now? Who did this sword stroke come from? Who did it fall on? The most important thing was the person who used this sword stroke still alive at that time? More importantly, if the person who used this sword stroke was still alive at that time, did he belong to the Li family? Chapter 471. Wang Tianzong thought a lot. However, he felt that his thoughts were not enough. Chaos often represents variables, represents confusion, and represents a lot of unexpected things. The situation in Eastern Europe could be said to be a big mess that the Dark World had not seen in decades or even nearly 100 years. When the unfathomable muddy water became black water that no one could see through, it was not surprising that anything would happen. In such an environment, it was not enough to think too much. Wang Tianzong stared at the films in front of him seriously. The films were real. This also meant that such an injury and the sword that caused such an injury had indeed existed. It was very similar to the inexplicable 6 paths of reincarnation that had been left on Qin Weibai. For the person who attacked to cause such injuries, it was clear that they were torturing him. What did this mean? I suddenly remembered something. Wang Tianzong suddenly said. Xian Ming's face was dignified. The origin of this film was completely inexplicable. It appeared directly on his desk without any psychological preparation. When Xian Ming set off, he had already told his subordinates that the entire Mount Dibbing was investigating the origin of this film. But now he had not received accurate news in Eastern Europe, which was enough to show that the person who sent this thing was extremely mysterious, and his means were extremely clever. The reason why he came to Eastern Europe as soon as he saw this film was that this film, combined with Qin Weibai's film, represented something. What Wang Tianzong wanted to say was exactly what he worried and even feared. King Tong glanced at Wang Tianzong and said nothing. She hadn't figured out what these things meant, so she didn't want to interrupt Wang Tianzong's thoughts. Wang Tianzong's fingers gently tapped on the film and said slowly, I also know the 24 moves of sword. Xian Ming paled for a moment. He kept silent. He knew exactly what that meant. In the past many years, in the era when the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai advanced and retreated together and dominated the Dark World, the martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai, the Lin clan and the Li family were all interconnected. Wang Tianzong, Lin Fengting, Li Kuangtu and Summer Solstice once learned swordsmanship together. In Wang Tianzong's father's generation, the most outstanding people of the 3 families also learned swordsmanship together. Wang Tianzong knew the 24 moves of sword. This also meant that Li Kuangtu also knew the 6 paths of reincarnation. That was not the point. The real point was that the friendship between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai was severed in Wang Tianzong's generation. Then, in their previous generation, the heads of the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai also knew the 24 moves of sword and the 6 paths of reincarnation. That was to say, the 24 moves of sword imprinted on this optical film might have come from an expert of the Wang family of Beihai. The 6 paths of reincarnation which he had used to kill Qin Weibai might have come from the Li family. The purpose of these 2 swords was to kill. How could there be so many abnormal masters in the Dark World? Since there was a possibility that one of the top experts of the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai had 2 kinds of sword intent. In that case, could the 2 swords on the 2 holograms have been made by the same person? Wang Tianzong was sure that the man was not from the Wang family of Beihai. Then only the Li family, which had been close to the Wang family of Beihai, and the Lin clan, which had been in seclusion, had these 2 sword intents at the same time. What made people speechless was that the Lin clan was now on the same side as the Li family. At least from the standpoint of the Wang family of Beihai, looking at the 2 X-rays, It made no difference whether the expert behind the scenes was from the Lin clan or the Li family. Your Majesty, could it be Li Honghe? Xianming suddenly asked. Few people in the dark world knew the 24 moves of sword. Few people in the dark world knew the 6 paths of reincarnation. There were even fewer people who understood 2 types of sword intents and could cultivate them to the pinnacle. This man was not from Beihai. The old patriarch of the Lin clan had been dead for many years. Li Honghe was the most likely candidate. Wang Tianzong glanced at him and said expressionlessly, "How dare you call Senior Li's name?" Xianming wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Finally he lowered his head and said nothing. "I know your doubts, but you must remember that some people may be our enemies, but even if they are our enemies we can't smear them at will. In many cases even enemies need to be respected." Wang Tianzong said blandly, "Senior Li will inevitably hesitate in his life, but his life is upright and above board. Let's not talk about this film for the time being. Let's talk about Qin Weibai. These 2 swords were made by the same person. Qin Weibai was still young at that time. Do you think Senior Li will torture and kill a child? Ridiculous. If he is really upright and above board in his life, what is going on with the purgatory of heaven capital today?" King Tong suddenly asked. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and shook his head. "Everyone has the right to survive and change the status quo. Senior Li can't be so bored as to torture and kill a child." King Tong stopped talking. "Your Majesty, does Senior Li have any brothers or something like that?" Xianming suddenly asked. "How do I know?" Wang Tianzong asked in reply. He thought for a moment and continued, "As far as I know he doesn't." "Play that film," Wang Tianzong suddenly said. Xianming nodded and made a phone call. In less than 5 minutes the big screen in the living room lit up. On the other end of the phone was the reference room of the Wang family of Beihai. Several loyal archivists put the film in front of the screen, bowed and left. In front of Wang Tianzong was the 24 moves of sword of unknown origin. On the screen was the 6 paths of reincarnation that had been imprinted in every inch of Qin Weibai's bones and flesh. 2 films and 2 kinds of sword intents, like 2 storms, kept gathering and entangling in the depths of Wang Tianzong's mind. Wang Tianzong looked at them carefully for a long time. In the nervous eyes of King Tong and Xianming he slowly closed his eyes. The Sword Emperor knew the 24 moves of sword. He also knew the 6 paths of reincarnation. 2 kinds of sword intents kept surging in his mind. They merged into one and then divided into 2. Sword light appeared in his mind. The sword light changed from fast to slow and he simulated it repeatedly. After an unknown period of time, Wang Tianzong slowly opened his eyes. "Do you think these 2 sword intents were made by one person or 2 people?" Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. King Tong and Xianming looked at each other and thought, "How could I know?" "I don't know either." Wang Tianzong said, "I just simulated the strength of these 2 sword marks." He paused. That was what he was most confused about. Now he was only half a step away from the so-called chosen one. According to the sword marks left on the film, he could imagine the sword energy that could leave such sword marks and make people hurt but not die, so he could vaguely judge the realm of the other party. If these 2 sword marks were made by 2 people, the mysterious person who used the 24 moves of sword was undoubtedly weaker. His peak strength was probably at the peak of the invincible realm, and it was even possible for him to reach the peak. The other party's lethality was slightly weak, but his precise control made Wang Tianzong feel incredible. The sword stroke on Qin Weibai was really powerful. Not to mention the exquisite control, Wang Tianzong thought that he was no worse than himself now in terms of the strength of the sword intent. And what made Wang Tianzong speechless was that now he looked at the sword intent that killed Qin Weibai and repeatedly simulated it. Wang Tianzong increasingly felt that it was his own sword intent. The 6 paths of reincarnation was a unique skill. But the patriarch of each generation of the Wang family of Beihai had his own path. The 6 paths of reincarnation of each generation of the patriarch was different. The 6 paths of reincarnation on this film was slightly different from his own sword intent, but they were almost the same. Wang Tianzong felt that this sword stroke seemed to be made by himself. The point was that he had never done it. And he couldn't do it. Even after the breakthrough he couldn't do it. "Put it away." Wang Tianzong suddenly waved his hand. Xianming froze, turned off the screen on the wall and looked at Wang Tianzong. "Don't think about it if you can't figure it out," Wang Tianzong said. Xianming was silent. How could he not think about it? Whether these two films were of the same person or not, when this person was not from the Wang family of Beihai, he could be said to be an enemy. If the mysterious expert behind the scenes really came from the Li family, how terrifying was the Li family now? The remaining power of the Samsara Palace. The remaining power of the Li family. Sai City, Dongqing clan, and the mysterious expert behind the scenes. If the Purgatory of Heaven capital was counted, Your Majesty, Xian Ming couldn't help calling out. Wang Tianzong glanced at him. The opponent's lineup seems to be too strong. Xian Ming said in a low voice. Wang Tianzong pointed to the film on the table and said quietly, "The person who sent this film to you also wants me to think so." Xian Ming was stunned for a moment. Obviously the other party is reminding me that the Li family is too strong now. Wang Tianzong said indifferently, rather than saying that the other party is kind, it's better to say that the other party is forcing me to take action first. He wants me to break the game. Xian Ming was silent. And is a strong lineup necessarily invincible? Wang Tianzong said, I know deity and Li Tianlan. Even if this expert's position is biased towards the Li family, so what? This is a good thing. Deity, Li Tianlan, and that expert, I think these three people will think that the Li family belongs to them. So who does the Li family belong to? Xian Ming's eyes lit up. Before he could speak, the gradually dimming screen in front of him suddenly flickered. Wang Tianzong glanced at the screen and narrowed his eyes. White light flashed on the huge screen. The white light slowly flowed on the screen and finally stopped. An old man appeared on the screen. He was dressed in a white robe, holding a scepter and smiling calmly. Xian Ming's face suddenly changed. King Tong had already exclaimed, "The Pope." Wang Tianzong looked at the screen with no expression. The Pope on the screen was bathed in the sun. The bright light of the Holy Land appeared on the screen, looking particularly warm. Tianzong, you killed chaos. Shouldn't you give the Vatican an explanation? The Pope looked at Wang Tianzong for a while and suddenly laughed. His body moved slightly and he seemed to take a step forward. Xian Ming, whose face changed dramatically, couldn't help but take a few steps back. Just because the Pope took a step. The step was very small. But the Pope's body walked out of the screen in an instant and stood directly in the living room. The extreme darkness slowly spread in the living room like the wind, covering Xian Ming's perception. Wang Tianzong lowered his head and picked up the film that Xian Ming had packed. He said calmly, "Don't play tricks on me. What explanation do you want?" Chapter 472. His Majesty sat in the bright moon tower and watched the lake for a whole day. The rain in Lin and stopped. The lonely boat on the West Lake was still floating. That touch of night had not changed at all. On the lonely boat was a saint who was about to break through. The night did not change and there was no hope for Saint to break through. His Majesty knew that he would have one less threat in the chaos of Eastern Europe. But he was not happy at all. It had been 2 days since Wang Qinglei left. The X-ray had been in Eastern Europe for nearly a day, but there had been no change in Eastern Europe and nothing that shocked the Dark World had happened. When the X-ray entered Eastern Europe, it was like a stone sinking into the sea, as if it did not cause the slightest ripple in Wang Tianzong's heart. His Majesty did not know what went wrong. He also did not know that Qin Weibai, who was meticulous, would also leave an X-ray of that year. But he knew Wang Tianzong's courage and the Sword Emperor's caution very well. No matter what the Dark World's evaluation of Wang Tianzong was, from an objective point of view, Wang Tianzong was worthy of the words, great talent and bold vision in his life. Such a person seemed to be born to stand at the peak of ambition. As one of the most outstanding patriarchs of the Wang family of Beihai in hundreds of years, Wang Tianzong was very decisive. It had been a day since the X-ray was sent. At least Wang Tianzong should have received the information that there might be a super expert behind the Li family. Whether this information was misleading or not, at least with Wang Tianzong's limitations he could not see any problem. But Wang Tianzong did not make a move. This probably meant that Wang Tianzong would not make a move. His Majesty stood up calmly. The air conditioning in the box was on high and the light was dim. In the dim light his eyes were still calm. Although there was no excitement, there was not the slightest frustration or loss. There was a small bottle on the expensive sandalwood table in the box. Inside the expensive crystal bottle were a few drops of extremely dazzling liquid. Next to the crystal bottle was a thick folder. His Majesty stood at the table, staring at the folder in front of him and hesitated for a long time. He remembered Li Honghe's reaction when he saw the X-ray. He said that the Li family owed him. When saying this, Li Honghe held the X-ray and did not speak for a long time. He finally turned and left. And when he was about to leave, he threw the optical disc back to her. The Li family doesn't owe you anything because no one in the Li family can do this. These were Li Honghe's original words. The Li family did not owe them anything. His Majesty suddenly sneered. If you don't owe me, then who owes me? His eyes were cold and tranquil like a glacier. He didn't care what Li Honghe had said. All he cared about was the result. As a result, on the night Li Honghe left, he got a few drops of cardinal blood that were crucial to his recovery. If he got the cardinal blood, he would keep his promise to protect the Li family's secrets, because it was also in line with his interests. However, it seemed that it was time to throw the folder in front of him. His Majesty thought for a moment, took out his mobile phone and made a call. The video call's response was a little slow. After a full minute, the call was connected. The General of 9 Serenities in Zhou State, Xiang, codenamed White Tiger, picked up the phone. His aged face appeared on the small screen of the phone with a respectful expression. Your Majesty. His Majesty said, Wang Tianzong hasn't responded yet. But Xiang shook his head. I don't think he will do anything. His Majesty understood Wang Tianzong's decision. The whole dark world also understood Wang Tianzong's decision. His Majesty agreed with this statement. He nodded and said, It doesn't matter. The reason why Wang Tianzong didn't do anything is that some things are not important enough. Maybe he saw through your Majesty's mind. Xiang said in a soft voice. Eastern Europe had now become a deadlock. Even if all the superpowers had entered Reki City, if there were no special reasons, there would be at most undercurrents surging in the city. Wulan State was now the place where all the superpowers confronted each other, and all the contradictions were concentrated here. But if there was no absolute certainty, no one would dare to take the lead to take action. Everyone would maintain restraint and reason. To put it bluntly, this was a deadlock. Wang Tianzong needed someone to break this deadlock and create opportunities. He needed an invincible realm expert to do all this. Because in such a situation, only the invincible realm expert on the divine list could break this deadlock, so that Wang Tianzong could see the opportunity. And His Majesty needed Wang Tianzong to break the deadlock. Because compared to the Wang family of Beihai and Wang Tianzong, he was far behind them in terms of background and personal strength. The farther the gap was, the more he naturally asked for. Wang Tianzong was now the strongest in the dark world. If he took action, it was impossible to overturn the whole dark world, but he could break the current deadlock and break it into pieces. What Wang Tianzong needed was a gap. And His Majesty needed countless gaps. The more gaps there were, the more he could do. So Xiang felt that His Majesty's X-ray was not so wonderful. It was equivalent to reminding Wang Tianzong that there might be another hand behind the chaos in Eastern Europe, which would only make him more cautious. Wang Tianzong was not a fool who was brave but not astute. Which was more important, the power of the Li family or the threat posed by His Majesty, the hand behind the scenes? Wang Tianzong's current choice could tell. Wang Tianzong is not stupid. His Majesty said lightly. Xiang looked at His Majesty and thought, isn't this nonsense? Do you know how to deal with smart people? His Majesty laughed and his voice was a little low. The best way is not to try to hide anything from him. If I send the X-ray over, I will tell him that after the chaos, I will also tell him that the Li family may be very strong now. It doesn't matter whether he believes it or not. It doesn't matter whether he does it or not. The most important thing is. His Majesty paused and said lightly, if I want him to take action, he must take action. So what if he is smart? So what if he is a half-step chosen one? Under the general trend, the real chosen one will have no choice but to be driven into a corner. So what if he is smart and sees through everything? When dealing with smart people, the most important thing to do is not to hide anything from him, but to give him a path where he has no choice. This was very reasonable. But Xiang did not understand. Azure Dragon, White Tiger, Vermilion Bird and Black Tortoise. The General of Dead Spirits of Zhou State could be said to be awe-inspiring. Xiang, codenamed White Tiger, was the oldest and the most experienced of the 4 spirit generals. But in the mind of Zhou State, the correct order of the 4 spirits was Azure Dragon, Vermilion Bird, White Tiger and Black Tortoise. The most experienced black tortoise was more important than the least experienced black tortoise. It was not a matter of strength. Xiang's strength was definitely not bad. He could be said to be a top expert among the half-step invincible realm experts. In recent years his weight was gradually surpassed by Vermilion Bird. In addition to his age, the biggest problem was that White Tiger was unwilling to use his brain. So Xiang thought for a while and did not come up with a specific result. He simply asked directly, "What do you want me to do, Your Majesty?" "From now on, start all our intelligence systems in Eastern Europe, and entrust the intelligence agencies of several other superpowers to help me spread 2 pieces of information." His Majesty's fingers gently stroked the folder in front of him. His eyes were calm and indifferent. The master of Samsara Palace is not dead and she is not even injured. Now she is hiding in the dark, waiting for an opportunity at any time and even creating an opportunity. Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong destroyed the headquarters of Samsara Palace with a sword strike, but it hit nothing. Xiang did not speak and listened quietly. The destruction of Samsara Palace was too sudden. Under Wang Tianzong's sword strike, the entire headquarters of Samsara Palace was destroyed. This matter was too abrupt. On the one hand it could completely prove Wang Tianzong's peerless strength, but on the other hand it made people feel strange. But because of the recognition of Wang Tianzong's strength, the Dark World did not suspect anything. Second, there is more than one master of Samsara Palace in Samsara Palace. Military Counselor Saint is not the strongest supermaster of Samsara Palace. His Majesty continued. This news had been confirmed. At least a few days ago when Jiang Qiansong fled, the invincible realm expert who interrupted the followers' communication with Jiang Qiansong was not the master of Samsara Palace. His Majesty would spread this news 3 times, but he would not provide evidence. Maybe some people did not believe it, but as long as one person believed it, there would be some changes in the whole chaos. You have 3 days to do all this. I will wait for your news in Zhongzhou State. His Majesty looked at Xiang and said in a tough tone. Xiang nodded. This was not a difficult task, so he answered without hesitation, "Don't worry, Your Majesty." His Majesty smiled, looked down at the folder on the table and said calmly, "Send a person who can be absolutely trusted to Linnan. I have something here that can block all Wang Tianzong's retreat. Take it to Eastern Europe and find a way to send it to Wang Tianzong." Xiang froze for a moment, then nodded. "I'll arrange it right away." His Majesty did not speak again and hung up the phone directly. Darkness returned to the private room. His Majesty sat on the sofa, closed his eyes and thought quietly. The chaos in Eastern Europe had now involved all his attention. Qin Weibai was undoubtedly his biggest opponent. But the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the Wang family of Beihai, and the Vatican were also not easy to deal with. In this situation His Majesty felt like a child grabbing a piece of cake that everyone coveted in the middle of a group of strong men with knives. Now he did have a lot of chips. The 3 disciples represented 3 kinds of power. But except for Jifeng's sword raining school, neither Xiang nor Melad could use their power unscrupulously. Moreover, he could use the power of the 3 disciples, but he also had to help the 3 disciples get what they wanted. Thinking about it carefully, there were really not many resources that could really let him squander unscrupulously. His Majesty sighed softly and suddenly thought of Jiang Qiansong and the Jiang family of South America. He really felt a little pity. If he could save Jiang Qiansong, the Jiang family of South America, which had lost 2 invincible realm experts, was badly injured and had to withdraw from Eastern Europe in embarrassment, was bound to cooperate with him. A Jiang family of South America, even if it was badly injured, could play a much greater role. He would be able to play a much greater role than the 3 disciples combined. Given the current situation of the Jiang family of South America, what he needed to pay was much less. What a pity! His Majesty opened his eyes and suddenly wanted to know how Jiang Qiansong was doing now, and whether there was still a chance to reverse the position of the Jiang family of South America. He refused a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Jiang Qiansong's current situation was naturally not good. That night he suddenly attacked but failed to kill Qin Weibai, which had already doomed him to be treated savagely. That night the stars were lonely on the top of the mountain and the moonlight was bright. Outside Reki City, which paid great attention to the environment, there was nothing to be picky about except that it was a little cold. The night breeze could be regarded as relaxing. Jiang Qiansong did not want to talk about cooperation with Qin Weibai in that samsara palace. So Qin Weibai simply changed Jiang Qiansong's place. The disciple's judgment was actually wrong. Because Qin Weibai was not in the secret base of the Jiang family of South America. Shi Lin Fengting and Gong Sun Qi returned to Mormon City together, with Jiang Qiansong, a super important captive. It was not the first time that Qin Weibai had done this kind of thing. So it was not the first time that the underground secret chamber in Mormon's Manor had received such a standard of prisoners. The secret chamber under the manor still shone with a cold metallic luster. In the house completely condensed by metal, Jiang Qiansong's whole body was tightly sucked to the high-strength magnet wall. The outside of this special house was metal, but the inside walls were all magnets. The huge suction came from every wall and ceiling in all directions, tearing Jiang Qiansong's body. Such a huge magnetic field was playing a role all the time. All signals had completely disappeared in this special cell, but the sound of the broadcast came in through a special device from the outside. This was a broadcast from all over the world, but it was all intercepted from the same clip. In all the clips, countless hosts were angrily rebuking what the Jiang family of South America had done in Wulan State in different tones, rebuking how cruel and ruthless he was in killing President Carlos. The news kept playing and it was transmitted into Jiang Qiansong's ears over and over again. The huge magnetic field tore at his body desperately, and the constant repetition of the news ruthlessly destroyed his spirit. Jiang Qiansong endured all of this without saying a word. He thought that he had persevered very well, but even he did not know that his spirit had gradually weakened to the lowest point. Qin Weibai had been living in the secret chamber for a few days, observing Jiang Qiansong's mental state, not anxious or impatient. Flaming Fire, who was a little pale, stood beside Qin Weibai and quietly looked at a black instrument beside her. There were only a few buttons on the instrument which were used to control the volume of the broadcast in that special cell. There were also radio channels. Flaming Fire had been staying here almost 24 hours a day these days. She would adjust the sound every hour and switch the channel at the same time. Sometimes the sound was very loud and sometimes it was very low. There were various languages in the radio channels, including Chinese, English, French, and Latin. All the means had only one purpose, that was to torture Jiang Qiansong's spirit. Flaming Fire looked at her watch. It was 11:45 noon. She reached out and casually pressed a few buttons on the instrument. The sound in the cell began to amplify, and the different prophecies of various channels suddenly began to play irregularly. "That's it," Qin Weibai suddenly said. "You take a break." "I'm not tired." Flaming Fire shook her head gently. "Take a break." Qin Weibai repeated it again. Flaming Fire glanced at her and nodded, but she couldn't help saying, "Boss, I think it's almost done." "Not yet." Qin Weibai stared at Jiang Qiansong in the cell through the screen in front of her and said slowly, "Only when his spirit is the closest to collapse can I hypnotize him. The will of the invincible realm is not so easy to destroy. Their spiritual defense is no worse than that of martial arts." "Boss, if your spiritual domain reaches the transcendent realm," Flaming Fire's eyes were a little fanatical. "Even the Pope of the transcendent realm can't easily control an invincible realm expert. At most he can protect himself, but it's difficult to affect the other's will." Flaming Fire said, "Oh. 1 more week and it's almost done." Qin Weibai whispered, approached the microphone in front of her and said calmly, "Mr. Jiang, can we talk now?" On the wall, Jiang Qiansong's body moved with difficulty. He was silent for a while, then gritted his teeth and said with difficulty, "Bitch?" Qin Weibai was not angry at all. She just said blandly, "Then you continue to think about it." She reached out and snapped her fingers. This action was very straightforward, very heroic, but also a little charming and delicate. Jiang Qiansong opened his eyes with difficulty. A huge butterfly appeared in the cell in front of him. The butterfly was colorful, flapping its wings with difficulty in the huge magnetic field, and its posture looked extremely distorted. There were more and more butterflies dancing. The whole world began to spin in Jiang Qiansong's eyes with the wings of the butterfly. The world was spinning. Outside the cell, Qin Weibai stood up and reached out to turn off the instrument in front of Flaming Fire. The huge broadcast sound disappeared in an instant. The absolute noise turned into extreme silence in an instant. Everything around Jiang Qiansong was still spinning, as if it was about to fall into a bottomless abyss. In the absolute silence and dizziness, Jiang Qiansong finally couldn't help but struggle wildly. Qin Weibai and Flaming Fire walked out of the underground secret chamber. It was noon. The eternal night in Mormons was still the same and the stars were dim. "Have a rest," Qin Weibai said. "Boss, what do you want to eat?" "I'll make it," Flaming Fire said softly. "No." Qin Weibai shook her head. Flaming Fire said yes, turned around and walked to her residence. Qin Weibai wandered aimlessly in her manor. The eternal night was cold. The manor was full of flowers. The rich fragrance of flowers blended with Qin Weibai's natural body fragrance, making people forget the vulgarity. "Boss Qin." A voice suddenly sounded. Qin Weibai slowly turned around. Tribulation came out of the darkness. "Do we still have to wait?" asked the only assassin of the invincible realm in the dark world. Qin Weibai said that Mormons would be the place of the final battle. But now it seemed that the place of the final battle seemed to be moving to Wulan State. Then what was the point of them waiting here? Qin Weibai looked at Tribulation in front of her with deep meaning in her eyes. "Wait for another week," she said softly. Tribulation frowned and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "What do you want to say?" Qin Weibai smiled. In an instant, it seemed that even the night light became bright and beautiful. "Boss Qin, are you familiar with the Dark Knights?" Tribulation asked. The Samsara Palace had a close relationship with the Dark Knights. The whole Dark World knew this. The Dark Saint's spear, the murderous weapon of the Dark Knights, had been fired for the Samsara Palace. Qin Weibai did not answer Tribulation's question. She just looked at Tribulation quietly and suddenly said, "Can't you let it go?" Tribulation froze for a moment. He was silent for a moment and said, "Can't you let it go?" This seemed to be a repetition or a question to himself, but in fact he was asking Qin Weibai. "I can't let it go." Qin Weibai replied resolutely. Tribulation nodded. "Me too." Qin Weibai sighed softly. She seemed to want to say something but she didn't know how to start. In the end she just said a few words with a pale face. "There is no result." "What about you?" Tribulation asked. "I'm trying hard. I don't want to give up either." He was talking about Tribulation and Angel. He was talking about Qin Weibai and Li Tianlan. Qin Weibai was silent for a while and said quietly, "Let's wait another week. After we tame Jiang Qiansong we'll go to Wulan State." Tame? Tribulation glanced at Qin Weibai and thought to himself, does she regard the patriarch of the Jiang family of South America as a beast? Jiang Qiansong is here. What about the deal with the Jiang family of South America? Tribulation asked suddenly. Qin Weibai reached out and picked a white flower. She tore the petals and said lightly, "There are still people in the Jiang family of South America who can speak. Now the news has almost come back." It was noon on August 12th in Eastern Europe. While everyone was paying attention to the situation in Eastern Europe, a piece of news swept through the dark world without warning. The news came from South America. After the great change in Wulan State, the Jiang family of South America, which had been silent and allowed the outside world to condemn it, finally made a sound. The timing was extremely delicate. At this time it had been nearly 6 days since the great change. Under the pressure of countless public opinions, the entire Jiang family of South America was divided up by the major forces. At this time the Jiang family of South America made a sound. It was undoubtedly a choice to make a concession. After giving up a lot of benefits, it tentatively took a step forward. Jiang Guochu, the heir of the Jiang family of South America, personally faced the media and admitted everything that Jiang Qiansong had done in Wulan State. When the world was in an uproar, the young man in his 30s once again announced an even more shocking news. The family council of the Jiang family of South America elected Jiang Guochu as the new patriarch of the Jiang family of South America. Jiang Qiansong, the former patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, was permanently expelled from the Jiang family of South America and completely removed from the family tree. This ruthless and refusal completely severed the relationship between the Jiang family of South America and Jiang Qiansong. At the same time, it was equivalent to getting rid of those sins. And Jiang Guochu apologized to the people and high-level officials of Wulan State with an extremely sincere attitude. He expressed his willingness to give Wulan State enough compensation, whether it was in terms of economy or support. Such an apology could be said to be full of sincerity in a low-profile manner in front of the whole world. In order to express 120,000 points of sincerity, after the Jiang family of South America decided to expel Jiang Qiansong, the first thing the new patriarch did was to apologize. Not only the media apologized. It was also a face-to-face apology. Jiang Guochu, the new patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, wanted to come to Wulan State in person and apologize to Wulan State. This could almost be said to be the most murderous and ambitious apology in the dark world in recent decades. Everything seemed to be pointing to two words. The Jiang family was not convinced.